Happy Wednesday to IB Nation. Welcome, everybody, to the latest edition of the Irish Breakdown podcast. We're going to have a twofer for y'all today. Obviously, the original plan was to talk about the Notre Dame stacking up matchup between the Fighting Irish and Navy. There's some very, very intriguing matchups in this game that I'm very much looking forward to discussing today, Ryan. That, of course, is Ryan Roberts, our recruiting analyst at Irish Breakdown. I'm Brian Driscoll. And then, of course, we got word this morning that Karson Hobbs is going to commit. The original plan after Saturday was he was going to decommit from South Carolina and then probably take a couple weeks to just kind of chill and everything and then make his decision to come to Notre Dame. But he decided he wanted to get it over with now. And so Notre Dame has added the 7th member to its 2024 top-ranked class, and that is Karson Hobbs, a 6'1", 180-pound cornerback out of Moeller High School in Cincinnati. Notre Dame has really not done a lot in Cincinnati in for years, Ryan, outside of some linemen. But now this is 2 years in a row 2 out of 3 years, because technically you're within a year span, but it's class-wise, it's 22 and 24. Notre Dame has been able to get 3 kids out of the state in sort of year after year after year. You had obviously the late flip of Jabron Payne in the 2022 class. And of course, Ben Minich committed to Notre Dame in the 2023 class, and now Karson Hobbs. So concerted effort by a staff whose head coach and starting linebacker or kind of basically linebackers coach and cornerbacks coach and several others are Ohio natives. It's very important for Notre Dame to do well in Ohio, especially the city of Cincinnati, Ryan. So on top of that, got a pretty good football player. Karson Hobbs obviously committed to Notre Dame. This has been an interesting recruitment, Ryan, because this is a kid that was a South Carolina commit that really jumped on Notre Dame's radar over the summer, and things kind of went pretty quickly from there.
Yeah, it was a really interesting one to watch, Brian. I mean, because, anytime that Notre Dame is about to does offer a player that is committed to another school, your immediate and this for any school is how open are they to other schools? Are they done with the recruiting process? Because we're talking about a 2024 kid who, again, there's a lot of time until his signing day, right? So, you want to see what the situation is. And we've had the opportunity to talk to Carson, obviously, on the site a few times since he's been offered and originally visited Notre Dame. And kind of the situation was that at the time it was South Carolina. Made a lot of sense for him and his family. Liked, obviously what the Gamecock program was doing with Coach Beamer over there. But he was always open to the process. He had consistently said that every single time, yes, I'm committed to South Carolina. They're going to have a big opportunity with me, but I'm going to let this play out. And there's other schools now that are obviously coming after him at that point. And Notre Dame, of course, being one of them, that presents a really awesome opportunity for him. So after this past weekend, what we were hearing over the weekend, we kind of expected it kind of going into the weekend that if things went really well, this one probably could escalate very quickly. And like you said, he decommits shortly after the visit. I checked in with him, right after he decommitted just to see if he was doing okay. Because I know that could be a tough decision for a lot of kids sometimes, But he was just like, oh, man, I'm great. I'm good. I'm like, oh, well, I know what that means, sir. Thank you for letting me know. So obviously got the word. It's a really interesting pickup, a big opportunity for Notre Dame to get into the state of Ohio. Like you said, Ohio State is the Midwest power, right? And Ohio obviously produces a lot of good football players. So going into the state and getting a kid that you obviously like, that was an SEC caliber player, just a couple days ago, right? So big opportunity for Notre Dame, good football player, obviously in Karson Hobbs. And I think the fit makes a lot of sense from all standpoints. And Notre Dame's able to really kind of close the door this past weekend and really, just iron this one out and make it happen. So big time gift for Notre Dame for sure.
So let's talk about kind of how they got here, Ryan. I think this is an interesting pickup, because what's the first thing that a lot of people are going to say? What's a 3-star kid? Like, 2 people have him ranked.
Yeah.
I'll just quickly remind you that Benjamin Morrison was around that same range when Notre Dame first started getting involved with him. He eventually became a consensus 4-star recruit, never got the recruiting ranking that he deserved. And we've seen how he's played out. I think Karson Hobbs is a kid that Ryan and I will dive into his game here a little bit, and we'll talk about what we like about him as a player and how he fits into the Notre Dame defense. But I want to say this. Number one, I don't care about rankings. Number two, I think this is a kid that fits what Notre Dame is looking for in a lot of different ways. And number three, if there is one coach on this staff that from a recruiting evaluation and development standpoint, not just at Notre Dame, but over the course of his career has earned the right, has earned the right to get the benefit of the doubt. There's two guys on the staff to me that when they offer a kid, my go-to reaction is to trust it. And now, of course, we're going to give honest assessment of kids and players and things like that. But that's Harry Hiestand on offense and Mike Mickens on defense. And this doesn't just talk about Notre Dame. We're talking about going back to Nick Johnson at Bowling Green, who was a second-team All-MAC kid as a true freshman. We're talking about Sauce Gardner. We're talking about Kobe Bryant. And, of course, what he's done in Notre Dame, he took a position group that was a major concern depth and talent-wise when he got here. And now you could make a case that moving forward by the time the 22 and 23 classes are both on campus could be the biggest strength on the football team when you look at the 21, 22, 23 classes in a row. So that's the first thing is I would say that he's going to get a little bit of the benefit of the doubt for me of guys who have had some level of long-term success. People talk about Dylan McCullough. I'm talking about guys that have been at Notre Dame more than a year. Now, Coach Mickens been here 3 years. We need to see what Coach McCullough can do over time at Notre Dame. He's obviously had success at other places. But we've seen Coach Mickens do that here multiple times, and that's kind of the thing where you have to say, look, this guy has more than earned a little bit of the benefit of the doubt for him to go after a kid this early.
Yep. I mean, it's said perfectly, Brian. I mean, just think about who are Notre Dame's two best outside corners right now, right? Like you have a kid that was a wide receiver to start his Notre Dame career. You have another kid who was a really underrated recruit and was coming in. And I mean, Benjamin Morrison has a very good opportunity this year to be a freshman All-American. Like he's played to that level of football.
He better be.
Well, some people that aren't super impressed, Brian, by our conversations in the past, but it's a conversation for another day. The point is, though, is that he has evaluated and identified talent that was not viewed at a certain level by some recruiting outlets, right? He's done that job. And I mean, Tariq Bracy was even a kid, and obviously I'm not talking about recruiting side here, but I'm talking about development side, right? And identifying talent. Tariq Bracy was a kid that lacked confidence a couple years ago, right? And he has now transformed him into one of the best nickelbacks in all of college football as well. So identifying and developing talent, Mike Mickens has proven that he deserves that level of respect. He deserves that level of leeway to, hey, even if maybe you aren't the biggest fan of a recruit, even that he brings in, I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt and see what they look like on campus, right? Like he has to earn that right. And I think that you got a really toolsy kid, obviously, with Karson Hobbs right now, right? And I think as long as we trust that Mike Mickens is the teacher that he has shown to be and the developer that he has shown to be, you have to feel really good about this one because Karson Hobbs has a lot of tools to work with, that's for sure.
Let's talk about sort of how we got here too, Ryan. I think obviously the need in the class is interesting. And I think the fact that they took him this early says a lot. And I'll say that for a couple reasons. Number one is there wasn't a need to rush into getting a cornerback in this class. There was no, I mean, you've got 3 kids in the 2021 class. And I'll tell you something right now, like I know they're not playing a lot, but I know the staff is very high on Chance Tucker. They're very high on Ryan Barnes. You know, Philip Riley brings some tools to the table. He's not quite on the same level as the other 2 kids. And the only reason they're not playing is because of just how good Benjamin Morrison and Jaden Mickey are. And all those kids have multiple years of eligibility. And then, of course, their name goes out. And as much as I love the 2022 corners, you could make a case that the ceiling for the 23 corners as a group is even higher. And that is obviously Christian Gray and Michael Bell. So you've got 2 classes in a row that are outstanding. You've got some kids in the 2021 class that have tools that bring something to the table. So Notre Dame entered this recruiting cycle, Ryan, really in a place where they could be patient if they wanted to. And so, and as we'll go over the list of guys when we kind of do a what's next after we talk about the film of Karson Hobbs, there's some impressive kids on the board that like Notre Dame. And I think right now Notre Dame is sort of shooting for 2 outside guys and a slot corner in this class. That's the goal, and we'll kind of talk about who those top targets are. So for them to take Karson Hobbs this early says a lot about what they think of this kid, that he's not just some, well, we'll see how he pans out. Hopefully, fingers crossed, he ends up being an okay kid. Right or wrong, the staff views this as a really good football player that they couldn't afford to wait for other bigger schools to get involved with him. And they've done a pretty good job of that since Marcus Freeman has kind of become the head coach, of finding some of these kids, like getting on Don Schuler before Georgia and Ohio State and Alabama. All those schools eventually offered to Don Schuler. When they got on him early, he wasn't a very highly ranked kid. He wasn't a kid that people were in love with. We even looked at some, like, there's some things alike, but we'll give him the benefit of the doubt. Let's see how he does as a junior. And then as a junior, he breaks out and does really well. Yep. There's been a lot of kids like that. Ben Minich, we kind of were like, let's see how the senior year goes. And then you watch a senior film, you're like, boy, I'm glad they got on this kid before everybody else saw his senior film, right? Yep. There's been a lot of kids like that at Notre Dame that they've been, they've kind of been able to get on a little bit before other people, which has helped them to land some of these kids. And so this is another kid like that, Ryan, where they really like him. They like his tools. They like what he brings to the table. And this isn't a depth piece for them. This is a kid that they really like and really think can add value to the cornerback room for Notre Dame moving forward. And they also feel he's just starting to scratch the surface of the kind of player he's going to be.
Yeah, I think his best football is definitely ahead of him. One exciting thing for me, Brian, is it wasn't too long ago where the depth at cornerback at Notre Dame was not something that you really wanted, right? Like, it just was not a great situation. You always had 1 to 2 good cornerbacks. Like, even think back to like the Troy Pride, Julian Love tandem, right? But the minute those types of guys would get injured or, would be, some type of durability stuff, then you're like, oh, well, who's the next option up, right? Like, going into next season, I mean, you have guys like Christian Gray and Micah Bell coming in that are just going to fight to try to be the 4th corner on this team, 3rd or 4th corner. Like, that's how deep this cornerback group has gotten. And I think that for me, you're betting on tools with a kid like Karson Hobbs, right? Like, you see all the tools there for him to develop into a really good outside corner. I mean, he's got the length, 6 foot, 6'1". He's got the ball skills, and he's got the all-around athleticism that you need to be a successful player. But I think the really fun thing is that Bishop Moeller asked him to do a lot of things on the offensive side of the football too, right? And that wide receiver background, it's hard to not think a little bit of Cam Hart, right? Because you look at him and you're like, what best part of Karson Hobbs' game, in my opinion, is his ability when he's in phase and he's in kind of the right body position, is he attacks the football in the air, and he's got really good ball skills for a kid that is his length. So as a potential boundary corner, or maybe to the field, I don't know, we'll see kind of how it shakes out. Kid's got a lot of things that you want at the cornerback position, and stuff that already Coach Mickens has shown that if he has those types of tools to work with, he has turned some talented football players into good cornerbacks so far in his Notre Dame career.
Ryan, let's dive in a little bit to the film here. I want to pull this up, and I want us to be able to talk about Karson Hobbs. And so we're gonna pull this up, and we're just gonna kind of let it play. We're gonna say we're just gonna let it play, but there's a chance we may rewind a couple things, and we're just gonna talk about just sort of what we really like about his game, what we see about his game, more so than obviously we kind of shared a little bit what we think Notre Dame likes about him. Some of that stuff we also like. And so we're going to pop in his film now. And the first thing, Ryan, right here, you'll see Karson Hobbs. He plays a lot of right corner for them, but in certain games against some of the better teams, like St. X, for example, he played on both sides. So they will match up with him. And the first thing that stands out, Ryan, is his size. He's listed as 6'1", 180. We'll see if he's either one of those, but he's definitely long. He's definitely a long kid. He's also, I'd say, tall is fine, but his arms are extremely long. Very long. And he uses them well. I mean, he's talking about when he's standing there, his arms are like middle of his thighs when he's just standing there. That's really good length. And he knows how to use it to a degree already. He's really good at with press coverage. You'll see he doesn't have to overextend to get a good jam. He uses his hands well in coverage. He's at the top of the screen again here. He knows how to, and of course, it really helps him with his ball skills. He's able to reach across. The thing about a long corner, the one of the underrated parts of being long, people think about, throwing around him, throwing over him, but a longer guy doesn't have to be body on a body to get his arm around a guy either. That's the other thing where you don't need to invite as much contact to get around the guy, get your hand on the football. And Karson Hobbs certainly brings a lot of that to the table, Ryan.
And not only does he bring the man possibilities, playing impress that we've seen in a couple of these clips, Brian, we also see some really nice stuff in zone with some instinctual awareness, some zone awareness. I mean, there was this, I think the second play of this highlight tape is him playing cover 2 and passing off a deep route, coming up and making a clean shot on a flat route, which is really nice to see. And then the very next play, he's working cover 3 and he's covering up a corner route and making a big play on the football. So again, the biggest things that I love about this kid are, you mentioned the length, right? Like, length is always a plus at cornerback position, but the ball skills he has, because he plays wide receiver as well, and he's got that easy ball ability to attack the football in the air, and the instincts that this kid has, despite being a guy that, I mean, playing both sides of the ball, there's an attention to detail that is going to be greater, obviously, when he goes to college and he's just focusing on cornerback all the time. But the natural instincts, I think, that this kid has as well, just ability to adjust in space and play multiple coverages. I think it's really nice stuff to work with. And there's, I mean, you're, like you said before, the long term for Karson Hobbs is going to much outweigh the short term. I think that there's a lot that this kid can improve on. But
Brian,
I mean,
you talked about instincts and reading. This is a perfect example of this right here. He's in zone coverage. He reads the quarterback perfectly and just jumps that route. This is against St. Ignatius. That's a really smart football play. But of course, you have to have the athleticism and length to get to the ball too, which he does.
Absolutely. Yep. And I think he's got really good short area explosiveness, getting in and out of his pedal and doing all that
really
stuff.
smooth, Ryan. That's the thing I like about him. He's really clean athletically. You know, he doesn't look overly sudden, but he is, because of how smooth he is. You know, his feet are really clean. His transitions are really clean. At times he'll get a little tight just from, you know, his feet will kind of get away from him a little bit. But when he keeps a nice base and keeps his feet, you know, kind of underneath his armpits and kind of keeps that narrow base, his transitions are really smooth and fluid, Ryan. And I think that's something that, number one, allows him to be really good in press coverage. But that's also what allows him to make plays like we just showed a minute ago, where he can just quickly change and just like smoothly kind of go right into a direction where a lot of guys may need to bend it. He can kind of do it cleanly and real sharply. And I think that's something that certainly helps him as well. And it's one of the traits, Ryan, too, that and his size are things where Notre Dame likes him as a corner. In my conversations with folks, you know, that are in the know, sources that we have around the program, I've never heard anything but cornerback listed with him. Okay, so I want to make sure that I'm very clear about that when I make my next statement. They like Karson Hobbs as a corner. That's it. That's what they're recruiting him at. However, you look at a kid like this and you say, if for some reason he can't crack the depth chart at corner, let's just say for whatever reason, with that size and that really easy change of direction. I mean, can you imagine a kid with that kind of feet and hips working off of the hash in cover 2 into the boundary, or working in the deep middle? He can play safety if it's about getting your best 11 on the field. This is one of those kids that could say, hey, look, he could move over and play that degree. He's a willing hitter. He's going to have to get a lot stronger. Obviously, he's just a junior in high school, but he's a willing hitter. But that's the thing, too, is even though he's not being recruited to be a versatile player, he is a versatile player.
I agree.
And that's something that I like about this kid's film as well.
Well, I mean, that's one thing I already mentioned, right, Brian, is the zone awareness. I mean, if you're talking about maybe potentially moving inside at the next level, like there's easy instincts to kind of point to and say, like, he can do that. And then obviously he has the experience in corner playing a lot of man. So, I mean, he could even be a little bit of a weapon in a secondary, you know, like maybe you bring him down and rotate him down. He's playing some man coverage, playing some short zone, doing some robber stuff. Like, there's a lot of possibilities with this type of kid. I think that this is where the game is trying to go from a modern perspective, right? Like, you want guys at the cornerback position, and we've talked about this before, that potentially can move around the secondary, right? A guy that can place man in the slot, can play man outside, can work in different zone concepts. I mean, you see it all around the NFL right now, and I think that is trickling down to college, where guys that can match up outside and in against different type of body types, like that's how you eliminate mismatches for the offense. And I think that this is that type of kid that outside corner, sure, but also the ability to work in the slot a little bit, potentially to work, you know, coming from depth as a safety, working downhill. There's a lot of possibilities, I think, for Karson Hobbs, because he has all the skill set that you say that could be a little bit of a move piece for me in the secondary.
Do you know what else those safety skills really work out with really well in the Notre Dame defense? The field corner position. And that's
Yep.
why Notre Dame likes him a corner is all the range, the change of direction, the fluidity, the driving downhill, the opening up on
Mhm.
routes, the being able to cover a lot of space. That's also very much how they ask their field corner to play.
Yep.
And we see it with Cam Hart, right? Like with Benjamin Morrison, it's like, go up and press and lock that dude down. Right? That's who Benjamin Morrison is. But with this kid, it's a little bit of a different deal, Ryan. It's he's a lot more like Cam Hart, who I like in the boundary, but I'm just referring to the way that Notre Dame uses Cam Hart.
Right.
It's here's why they do it. It's not that Cam can't play there. It's just he's so rangy and athletic and is able to cover so much ground that you're just like, boy, that's just really important again in today's era to have that kind of player. So it's almost like you want those big safety type players, not just to have those safety sized corners, not just to have them play corner or safe to be able to move to safety, but it's also, Ryan, to where you say, hey, look, we're going to get 3 corners on the field. It's also to say that some more and more teams are looking to add that kind of body to the cornerback position, especially teams that are going to play a lot of zone to the field. And
Well,
that's just one of those things that, again, that he brings to the table.
Well, think about this, Brian. We've talked about this also before. When Coach Freeman was at Cincinnati, when Mike Mickens was at Cincinnati, you mentioned a couple guys early already, right? You talk about Ahmad Gardner. You talk about Kobe Bryant. They're both longer corners, right? And that what that gave them possibility was to move around a little bit. I mean, even think about Brian Cook that they had in that secondary as well. Brian Cook started out as
the Nick Johnson kid that I was talking about at Bowling Green, Ryan. He was 6'2", he was 6'2", 180.
Yeah.
Again, he was first team all conference kid under Mike Mickens as a true freshman.
Yep. And you think about James Wiggins that was at Cincinnati as well. Like both those safeties, Cook and Wiggins, were former corners that transitioned to safety later on in their careers. So, I mean, when you look at all those kids, they have the ability to move around and match up to different type of body types, different types of skill sets. That's what I think Marcus Freeman and Coach Mickens want to have in the back end, because that gives you so much more versatility to create mismatches for yourself, which takes a lot of the onus off of other players to kind of just be a specific role, right? Like you can do a multitude of things. You don't have to make up for lack of talent in other spots. Like you can kind of just trust your responsibility and your defense, right? So I think that's why you want these types of versatile players, because it makes everything easier in front of you to be a little more creative and be a little more specific to what you're asking front seven to do.
Let's talk about a little bit about what's next before we move on to our Navy talk conversation. Obviously, this is one of 3 corners. Minimum 2 is they're okay. We're good. We met a minimum need. What they'd like to do in this class, however, is get 3. They'd like to get 2 guys that kind of project as outside guys and another guy that projects as the slot, a guy that can also play the slot. I don't think they want anyone that's only a slot or only. I mean, they want that versatility, but a guy that can definitely play the slot. And right now, Ryan, there's really 7 guys on the board. 5 we're going to focus on today because 2 of them are just long shots. There's a kid from California that's committed to USC that talks Notre Dame, but he's not come Notre Dame. And then there's a kid from Alabama that they're still talking to that, again, very, very highly unlikely. There's 5 guys right now that I think are going to be the focus of those positions. And the first guy to talk about is a name that Notre Dame fans are very, very, very familiar with, and that's Eli Bowen, who is a 5'9", 170-pound cornerback from Denton Guyer High School. He's the younger brother of Peyton Bowen. But I've had so many conversations with people at Notre Dame, and I'll ask about Eli and Peyton, and they're always like quick to be like, don't put them together. I'm like, well, what do you mean? They're like, yes, they're brothers, but we really like Eli. You know what I mean? And at one point in time, I asked the source, I said, well, if Peyton did flip, would you still recruit Eli? And they're like, absolutely. Like we genuinely like Eli. Right. And they view him as sort of that inside-out guy. Yes, he could play outside in certain looks, but they love his potential as a corner and as a slot corner. And as we've seen with Tariq Bracy, that slot corner plays a ton, and he's a very important player. And you talked about the modern offense, Ryan. That's the one thing that Al Golden has brought to Notre Dame is that situational. I mean, Marcus Freeman did it, but we're seeing it up to even more now. Is the ability to use sort of the situational football from a personnel standpoint, where Tariq Bracy's the nickel, but he plays a ton and he plays a very important role. They view Eli Bowen as being, I mean, think of Tariq Bracy, a stronger version of Tariq Bracy, and you've got Eli Bowen, a more natural defensive type of player as well. Tariq Bracy was more of a really athletic kid who was a great running back, kick returner, that had to learn corner. That's what they see Eli Bowen as being. So he is absolutely a priority recruit. Now, is Eli going to end up Notre Dame? It's a big question mark because the family's not pushing him towards Notre Dame. Notre Dame is not trying to is from what I'm told, they're not really pushing the package deal thing. They're trying to, as best they can, recruit Eli as Eli, from what I'm told. Mm-hmm. And you know, he's not close to making a decision either, Ryan. So, but that's a kid that let's put it like this: we expect Peyton Bowen to sign in December. Mm-hmm. Once that has happened, do not expect Notre Dame to all of a sudden say, "Well, we got the guy we wanted. Let's back off Eli now." Expect them to continue pushing that, and in some ways, ramp it up a little bit, because I think now it's like, hey, Peyton's here. Don't worry about Peyton now. Let's focus on you. So that's obviously a kid that's a very much a top of the priority kid for Notre Dame in that class.
And I think that will be very important for them when you get to that point, right? After Peyton does sign with Notre Dame in this, this hypothetical, that you can put all your attention on Eli. Because right now, I mean, what does it look like, Brian? I mean, not that, this is Notre Dame's vantage point, but it's like, it's a little hard to individualize them sometimes because you are in the same household. You play for the same high school team. And you want to make sure that Eli knows that moving forward, especially, that he is a priority. Because I think it's an important thing to say is that if there was no Peyton Bowen, Notre Dame would still have a lot of interest in Eli, right? Like if they weren't brothers, if Peyton didn't exist, like in that hypothetical, Eli Bowen
would have gone somewhere else.
Exactly.
I mean, Eli Bowen is still a priority recruit for Notre Dame.
100%. And he's a kid that, 5'9", 170 something pounds. I mean, he's grown a little bit this season, which has been nice to see. He looks closer to 5'10"-ish at this point, and he's gotten a little thicker, which has been great to see. But the thing that you love about Eli, Brian, is that his instincts are as good as anybody that we're going to talk about today.
Yes.
He's really good football player, man. Just great instincts to him.
One thing I was going to say, Ryan, about Eli is he's not a top 100 kid right now in the rankings. I'd probably have him there. I haven't done my rankings yet, so I can't say for sure. But here's the thing, is the only thing that keeps him from being a top 50 kid just like Peyton is his size. That's it. He's actually a more instinctive defensive player at the same age than Peyton was. Because with Peyton, when we talked about Peyton last year, we said Peyton is just an elite athlete. I mean, great two-way player. He had natural skills on defense, but what had not yet really mastered defense yet. Eli, even as a sophomore, last year in 2021, was their best defensive back from a production and just a understanding of the defense kind of kid. He was like a 10 interceptions last year. That's in a defense with not only Peyton, but Ryan Yates, who I believe is still committed to LSU, correct? I believe.
Yes.
So, I mean, you're talking about a kid that the only thing keeping him from being a top 50 recruit, in my opinion, Ryan, is about 2 inches of height. That is it. And honestly, as we've learned with Tariq Bracy, I don't really care about that. If you're sticky in coverage as a nickel, the height doesn't affect you as much because he'll have his brother behind him, and Don Schuler and other guys behind him helping to protect against any of the routes that may impact the kid of that size. But he's a tremendous – he's one of the best football players on the board. Now, there's some things about him as a prospect that don't have him ranked as high, like the height. I mean, he is only 5'9". I mean, we can't just ignore that. But you're willing to accept that because everything else about him is tremendous. He's borderline elite in almost every category except I'd say probably pure speed and height. I'd say those are the two that would – athletically, elite. Instincts, elite. Technique, elite. Production, beyond elite.
Yes.
It's just those two things that drag him down a little bit.
And one thing that we loved about Peyton and that we still do love about Peyton is that Peyton is such a good athlete that you could say, Peyton, go out at wide receiver because we've seen it, right? And he's a dynamic wide receiver. Eli is also a good wide receiver. He is. And I think those ball skills get shown off. I think those instincts are shown off all the time. And he is kind of that inside-out player. I mean, like you even mentioned Tariq Bracy, who, he's a starting nickel, but one of his biggest plays of the year was against BYU, where he's playing outside.
Yeah, as he started as an outside guy in a base defense, a 4-3 personnel defense. Yes, you're correct.
I think that Peyton is the perfect player, Brian, as the game continues to evolve, where, hey, let's say we have a 2 wide receiver set where we have our quicker, faster guy outside, and we have our big slot on the inside. Hey, Peyton, you're a slot normally, dude, but go out and cover.
You mean Eli?
I mean, Eli, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Eli, go outside and cover Wes Welker instead of covering, the big slot inside. Like, that's the type of player he is, man. He has that inside-outside ability. He's really, just his spatial awareness is fantastic. Like, this is a cover 2, cover 3 corner waiting to happen if he lasts outside. But again, at worst, I think this is a high-quality slot defender, high quality. He's got that type of massive upside.
Another guy that I view as sort of a slot guy right now that's also on the board is Emilio Agard, who is a 5'10-ish, 160-pound kid from Philadelphia. Very good prospect as well. A guy that Notre Dame has had on campus. I believe he visited this season, correct?
He did.
He's another kid that's on Notre Dame's board. I would say that they're a little bit further behind him than they are, obviously, with Eli, but he's a kid that's on the board as well.
Yeah, he's another talented player. In a similar vein to Eli, he is a really good instinctual player. And the thing I love about Emilio is a really cat quick athlete, that changes direction. He can match up against really athletic and quick slot receivers. He can also work outside, and he has the stickiness to stay in good position. Like you said before, though, Brian, the one stickler to him, again, is the size. He's not the biggest guy in the world, but another kid that can work inside and out and has really nice coverage skills. Like, all around, this kid can play zone. He can play some off man. He clicks and closes with a tremendous ease, and he stays in the hip pocket of receivers, man. At the end of the day, he's a really good man coverage player who has that inside-outside versatility as well. So, I know Notre Dame's going to keep recruiting him because he fits that mold of what they're looking like as that inside-outside guy, and he's certainly talented, to say the least.
If you could if you could sort of have if you could have sort of the dream class for Notre Dame of who they want, I believe, and who I like the combination of uncommitted players right now, I think that trio would be obviously Karson Hobbs, who they already have in the class. It'd be Eli Bowen, and it would be the next kid we're going to talk about, and that's Aaron Scott, another Ohio kid. Notre Dame staff likes Aaron Scott a ton, from what I'm told. 6'1", 170-pound kid from Springfield, Ohio, former place I used to live. Obviously, I lived in Springfield when I was coaching at Wittenberg. So very familiar with that area, very familiar with that high school. Very talented kid, very athletic kid. Going to be hard to get out of the state of Ohio, but he likes Notre Dame. He's been to Notre Dame, I believe twice in the last year. I believe he's been on multiple visits to Notre Dame. So they're at least in the game. And I think what happens now with a kid like Aaron Scott, for example, is now that Karson Hobbs is in the class, that allows Mike Mickens to start spending and Chad Bowden to start spending a lot more time on sort of that next group of kids. And it's going to be Aaron Scott. We'll talk about a couple other kids here in a minute, but allows them to – Notre Dame is going to be with Karson Hobbs in the class, Ryan. Notre Dame can really narrow their board on the kids that they like and want and think they have a legitimate shot at and say, hey, let's go after them. Like I said, it's always going to be hard to get a kid out of Ohio that Ohio State wants, and they do want Aaron Scott. But Notre Dame is in the game here, and this is a kid that Notre Dame is going to be able to kind of start focusing a lot more attention on as they move forward. And let's be honest, Notre Dame's corners right now are better than Ohio State's corners and have been for a couple of years. Yep. So that's something that they can sell. And their corners coach and head coach are Ohio guys. That's not hurting them. Trust me, whether that's going to result in them getting kids, we'll find out. Right? As far as getting kids, they're getting kids out of Ohio, but beating Ohio State for kids out of Ohio, that remains to be seen. Sure. But it is certainly making these kids a little bit more receptive to the pitch, and that's all you can ask for at this point in time.
And I think that for me, Aaron Scott has a lot of alpha upside, Brian. Like, he's a kid that, that's the true boundary corner, right? Like, he can run, he's long, he's explosive. Everything's there. It's just about him. It's just a natural maturation that's going to happen, right? Like, he's 170 pounds soaking wet right now. He needs to get bigger. He needs to get stronger. All those things will happen, and all those things, will figure itself out as only a junior in high school. So everything is there for Aaron Scott to be that true, we'll use the word shutdown corner as tentatively as possible, right? There's no true shutdown corner, but a kid that can follow any body type into the boundary, that's this type of kid. That's this type of kid that can be physical, that can be that alpha. He has great instincts as well. But the thing that really gets you excited is that he is that man coverage corner at the next level. He's got that length, size, athleticism. It's all there. He is that all-around kid that when you say, how good can he be? And it's just really like, what's the development look like? Is he continuing to get bigger? Is he listening to coaching? If he does all those things, then Aaron Scott has massive upside.
From what I'm told, all those boxes get checked, first of all. Second of all, who he reminds me a lot of is Benjamin Morrison as a player. I mean, Benjamin's was thicker, a little bit thicker at the same age, but very similar players, right? Very similar players. And you can see why Notre Dame likes him, right? Because I think he's a kid that can play both field and boundary. That's the thing is like he could come in early, and if he is one of your two best corners, let's say he comes in as a freshman and he's ready to play like Benjamin Morrison was, and let's just say he's going to start. Benjamin's got boundary locked up. This is a kid that can play field, and then when Benjamin goes to the NFL, can easily transition into the boundary as whoever else kind of steps in there. I'm not saying that's going to happen. I'm just saying just hypothetically, just to point out his versatility, he can play both spots. Ryan, you're spot on. This is a kid that you say, go cover that guy.
Yes,
that's what they're doing with Benjamin Morrison. They're just like, dude, go cover him, right? And they've been doing that for weeks, and it says a lot about what they want to do, but also speaks to his talent. That's the kind of ability Aaron Scott brings to the table as well.
Well, for the previous players we're talking about, Brian, it's like, they can all play man coverage to a certain degree, but also I want to mix in a lot of zone because of the instinctual side of the game. For Aaron Scott, I'm just like, Aaron, that's your guy, man. Go get him. Take him.
But you can play zone him because he's long.
You can.
And that's the thing that's the thing you like. It's like he can do more things. He's a good tackler. He's a skinny kid, but he'll hit you. He's not afraid of contact at all. Also another kid that plays offense. And actually, it was a really nice battle watching him and Christian Gray go against each other this year. Was it season opener? Did they play in the first or second game? I think it was a season opener.
I think it was the first game.
They had a really good battle. I mean, watching those two kids go against each other. I believe there was a play where Christian Gray broke up a pass to Aaron Scott in the end zone in that game.
Because I think the Smet played them first game, and then they played IMG the second, right?
I believe so, correct. That's correct, yeah. So we've seen him go up against a kid that Notre Dame already has and really likes, and so they're going to continue to push for him. Another name to know, we don't have a lot to say about him right now because we're still trying to get a hold of him and kind of learn more about him, but we do know he's on Notre Dame's radar. He was supposed to have visited this weekend. We have not been able to confirm that he was on campus just yet because he doesn't really talk to us at this point in time, and that's Braden Lee, who is a 6 foot, 165-pound corner out of the state of Maryland. Another rangy, long, not as tall as some of the other guys, but 5'11", 6 foot. Very athletic kid, very talented kid, very long kid. So he's another kid that's on Notre Dame's radar. As we are able to learn more about him and see what his interest level is like and things like that, we'll talk more about him. But he's definitely a name that you need to know. Very talented, top 100 caliber kid. Like a lot of these kids, Aaron Scott, Eli Bowen, Braden Lee, they're all top 100 caliber kids to me. They're all top 100 talents to me. So they're definitely going after dudes. Emilio Agard, I'd probably say is more of a top 150-ish kind of guy for me right now, but he's in that conversation as well. So very talented players, Ryan, on the board.
Oh, without a doubt.
So one more name that I want to bring up, Ryan. Now that Karson Hobbs is in the class, do not be surprised to continue to hear Notre Dame and Caleb Beasley be mentioned together. Don't be surprised by that. I think that Notre Dame is not going to give up on him right now. They're still going to keep recruiting other kids, but they're not going to stop recruiting Caleb Beasley until they're full, or he just says stop calling. And from everything I've been told so far, that conversation has not happened. Conversations have happened, but that conversation has not happened. So we'll see kind of how that one plays out. Obviously, right now he's committed to Tennessee, but he has not completely told Notre Dame, sorry, don't want to talk to you anymore, is what we'll say.
Yep.
So that is the cornerback board for Notre Dame at this point in time, Ryan.
Yep. It's a really talented board, like you said. It's going to be interesting to see how everything shakes out. I mean, a lot of time, obviously, until signing day of next year. Hopefully, I'm still in this position next year, Brian. Wink, wink. Next contract's up. You know what I mean?
We'll see. Just don't tick me off in the next month and a half, and I think we'll be okay.
Sounds good. But it's going to be really interesting, man, because like you said, the last two classes, especially going from Benjamin Morrison and Jaden Mickey to now Micah Bell and Christian Gray. If Notre Dame keeps stacking these types of classes, what was a solid to, solid position for Notre Dame at cornerback is now turning into an absolute strength. You want to talk about closing the gap? You want to talk about erasing the gap? That's what these last couple classes are really doing for Notre Dame. And if they're able to sign another one in 2024, then you're really seeing what Mike Mickens and this defense are cooking up, man. And you're going to see cornerback continue to be a position of strength for years to come.
Ryan, let's move into the matchup of Notre Dame and Navy. Today, we are going to focus on the stacking up matchup, and we're going to spend more time on certain matchups, a little less time on others with this unique, very unique Navy team. And I'll tell you what, there's some very interesting numbers for Navy when you look at their football team, and some areas where you're like, wow, they're a lot better than you thought they would be. And some other areas where you're like, yeah, they're not very good there. So that's a very, very interesting season for Navy, Ryan. I think when you look at them, they're a team that their season started off really bad. They obviously lost at home to Delaware to start the season. They got blown out by Memphis. And then the next week, they earned a really good victory over East Carolina on the road. East Carolina is currently 6-3 and has a 3-game win streak over Memphis. They beat UCF, who's in the top 25, by 21, and then they went on the road and beat Brigham Young. They also have a 20-point victory over South Florida and an 18-point victory over Old Dominion, and only lost to NC State by 1. Navy had a larger margin of victory over East Carolina than NC State did, who's currently a top 20 football team. So, and then of course, what does Navy do the next week? They go out and lose to Air Force, they end up losing 3 of their next 4. They have a blowout win over Tulsa in the middle of that, which is weird. An ugly win over Temple, and they're coming off a competitive but 10-point loss to Cincinnati. They're just not the same team they used to be. They're not the same team they were from like 15 to 17, 18 when they were competing for the AAC crown. They're just not that team. But I will say this. They're still dangerous. They're much better running the triple option, and we'll dive into the specifics of the triple option tomorrow in a show that I'm going to be doing with Jesse Stiers. We'll dive into the specifics of what they're doing tomorrow, Ryan. But they have definitely jumped up their rushing production this year. If you look at what Navy was doing last year, for example, they were at 226 a game. They're up over – actually, no, I'm sorry. I read that wrong. They're about the same as they were last year. I think I read that incorrectly. So they're still a rushing team, but they're just not what they were in the past. But I will say this. They look a lot more like the defense that we saw during that stretch when they were pretty good than they have been the last couple of years. So that's what makes this a very intriguing game. Notre Dame, it's kickoff at noon on Saturday. It's going to be at M&T Bank Field, correct? Mm-hmm. Is that what it is in Baltimore where the Ravens play? I've actually played on that field, Ryan. I played against the team you played in college. I played against Frostburg State in that field, actually. And so I'll be down there for the game. Ryan, have you decided if you're going to be driving down for the game or not yet? Or
It's tentative. We should know in the air.
Okay.
Yeah, by tonight we'll probably know.
Well, I'll be there for it. But this is an intriguing matchup, Ryan, and we'll have plenty to talk about as we dive into it. But I really want to start off with the statistical breakdown. Mm-hmm. We're going to begin with the matchup of the Notre Dame offense against the Navy defense, Ryan. And this is an area where it's good on good and bad on bad. I mean, that's just kind of the reality of what it is. Notre Dame's offense. You look at Notre Dame's rush offense, Ryan, and it is really amazing to see what they've been able to do the last 5 games. Mm-hmm. Even with a game against Stanford where the line played well, but the running game wasn't overly productive because they only had 150 yards for a host of reasons, but they ran for over 200 yards in 5 of their last 6 games. For context purposes, last year, Notre Dame only ran for over 200 yards 3 times all season. They have 5 such performances in just through 9 games this season, and they've jumped their yards per game up quite a bit. If you look at some of the stacking up numbers for this football team, so for example, if you kind of talk about where they were going into what was the first game they had 200 yards? It was against North Carolina, right?
Yeah.
They were, averaging less than – I'm actually pulling it up now. They were averaging 117 rushing yards per game. After 3 games. They were only averaging 117 yards per game. And then you even look at the Stanford game. So after 200-yard games in a row, then you go into the Stanford game, and they're still only averaging At that time, after back-to-back 200-yard games, they're only averaging them. See if it'll pull up here. It's loading a little bit slow for me today. But I think they were only averaging 100 in the 140s at that particular time, Ryan. And to see them now jump all the way up to where they were 174, after those back-to-back games. And now you look at them just 3 games later, and they're creeping up to 200 yards per game. The evolution of this rushing attack in the last 5-6 weeks has really been impressive. 117 going into the North Carolina game. That was after 3 games. 6 games later, they're now creeping up on 200, and they've been one of the best rushing attacks in the country here over the last 6 games. Here's the surprising part, Ryan. They're going against one of the best statistical rush defenses in the country in Navy. That is not something I would have predicted. In a year where there's a lot of things that have happened that I would not have predicted, this is one of them. A Navy team that's this good against the run is shocking, to say the least. I mean, they were decent against it last year, 131 last year, but 88 yards a game is a really impressive number for Navy. And they're doing it, Ryan, with consistency. I mean, the only team that's had over 160 yards rushing on them, actually, let me check that. The only 2 teams have gone for over 105 yards against them on the ground. Air Force at 200 and Houston at 180. The Houston game was not good. Obviously, Houston's not a great rushing team. They're 160 a game. But Air Force this year, Ryan, is averaging 324 yards a game. Held them over 120 yards below their season average. And if you look at the rest of their production this year, 13 yards, 91 yards, 25 yards, 20 yards, 55 yards, 103 yards, and 105 yards. And you're looking at the yards per carry too, 0.5, 2.8, 3.7, 4.3, 1.4, 5.0, 5.3, 1.0, 2.8. So you can't really use the whole, well, they're just not giving up yards because they're not on the field very much. Nope. They're not. Every metric that they have defensively when it comes to the run game grades out very, very high from a production or lack of production for the other team standpoint.
Well, and you look at that tackle for loss number, Brian. I mean, they're 47th in college football with 56 tackles for loss. It's not a crazy number, right? So that tells me that they have been an efficient team as well, stopping the run. Like they're not. It's not like they're getting a bunch of negative runs and then they're getting gashed, right? Like they're consistently making plays at or near the line of scrimmage, like they are, and 3.2 yards. I mean, you know what's funny is these numbers are almost mirror image to what Clemson did, coming into the game last week. And obviously, different level of competition and all that type of stuff. But I mean, Navy has surprisingly done incredibly well at stopping the run. And it wasn't something that I was actually expecting going into this week because, it's just I think it's a little bit of a misconception that my mind jumps to, that like Navy's probably bad at stopping the run, but they are a well-coached team in the front 7. They're a well-coached team in being gap sound in the run game, and Notre Dame has a challenge. Should Notre Dame be able to run the football on that?
Oh, yes.
There's no doubt about it. But that's what we'll say is that Navy is not going to come in without a inkling of possibility of stopping it, right? Like they are going to come in and say, hey, you have a great rushing attack. We have a great rush defense. Let's go to work, man. Let's have a battle at it, I mean, so you're playing against a good unit, a good run-stopping defense. Notre Dame has to exert their will on them this week in the run game. They have to be ready for the challenge because Navy is, again, you're in Baltimore. You're away from home. Navy's going to come in this one with some juice going, right? Shot at a team that just humiliated Clemson on national television. Like, let's give it a go here, man. So it's going to be an interesting matchup and one that I'm very intrigued to watch how it kind of plays out in this one.
Like, is this a thing where we're talking about, oh, Navy should shut down? No. We're not saying that. But what I am saying is if Notre Dame runs the ball effectively this week, and number one, you hope that the Notre Dame players have a healthy respect for Navy, and you hope that the Notre Dame coaches have a healthy respect for Navy's defense. Because, again, if you don't, they can limit you, right? I mean, they can. We've seen it happen to this Notre Dame team before. If they run successfully against Navy, the reason this matters is because you have to respect how quality of a performance it is. So if Notre Dame does go out and pound out over 200 yards again this week, then you have to look at it and say, hey, that was a pretty good performance. It was a pretty good performance by the team. And yes, the rank for the Notre Dame yards per attempt is 49th, not 4.9. So that's apologies on my behalf. But when you look at Notre Dame and you kind of look at what they've done in recent games, I think it gives a little bit more, even more context to where Notre Dame is. And obviously right now, you look at the Irish, they rank 28th in yards. But I think we can all confidently say that this team is certainly a much better team consistently week after week after week. And we've seen it now really for 6 straight weeks where the offensive line has really played at a high level, where we can kind of ignore the first, not ignore, but kind of chalk the first 3 games up as this is a football team that's still finding its way with a new coach. So, but if you look at the last 6 games alone and you just look at where Notre Dame is in the last 6 games and project that where they would be, they're at 233.8 yards per game, Ryan, which would rank them 10th in the country. And it would rank them 10th in the country behind 3 teams that I know of that run the triple option. I don't know if like Georgia State does. I'm not sure if they do. No. But I do know that Air Force, Army, and Navy do. Mm-hmm. So you talk about Notre Dame ranking 10th in the country, 7th among non-triple option teams, and they'd be 4th in the country amongst Power 5 teams in rushing the football, if you could project that over the course of the season, which puts into context. And they've done all that with almost no semblance of a pass attack for the last month. So it just kind of puts into context just how good this Notre Dame rush offense is. And Navy has yet to play a Power 5 team. That has to be taken into account too. Now, that doesn't diminish that Navy's done really well against the quality competition, but let's be honest, they have not faced a rushing attack like Notre Dame this year. They have not.
That's what was the craziest thing about that Clemson game, Brian, was not only did you run for 260 whatever yards against one of the best rush defenses in college football, you also did it without a passing game, right? Like Notre Dame literally just went, we're going to run the football on you today and we're going to dominate you. And in that instance, you like the matchup of Notre Dame coming into this game because, like you said, they're on a roll running the football. They just dominated one of the best rushing defenses in all of college football. They have another opportunity to do it against another quality run defense, but there's no reason to think that Notre Dame can't do it. But at the end of the day, I like what you said yesterday on the show that this gives Notre Dame, I think, a little bit of like, hey, we need to come and play this week, right? Like this team isn't just going to hand it to us. It's not like they're just going to come up and show up and just collect their stuff and leave right afterwards, right? Like they're here to play a football game, and they're going to have some confidence coming in with these numbers kind of in front of them. But at the end of the day, Notre Dame has another challenge in front of them, and they have to be up for the challenge against Navy.
Advantage Notre Dame, Ryan. I know that Navy statistically has the edge, but we try to do context in these examples, and I think Notre Dame certainly gives the edge. Here's one interesting part of Navy. Mm-hmm. They're actually a tad bigger than Syracuse. If you look at their starting lineup, their starting defense now they're a 3-4. They're sort of a 3-3-5 team, but I kind of think it's more 3-4 personnel wise. It's kind of a 3-3-5. It's kind of a 3-3-5 personnel wise, but it's more of a 3-4 structurally, in my opinion. Would you agree with that, Ryan?
I would.
But their front is actually not that small compared to past years, but it's undersized. But you've got a nose guard that's 6 foot 256. He looks almost the same as the kid that Syracuse has. He actually looks a little bigger to me, even though the other kid was listed as 10 pounds heavier. I don't think that kid. You and I saw that kid very up close and personal. I didn't think he was 266 pounds. Probably not, in my opinion. The kid at Navy looks to be accurately listed 6 foot 256. That's Donald Bernard. Jacob Busick is 6'4", 256. Keep in mind that that similar position at Syracuse is about 215, 220 pounds. And then Clay Cromwell's their defensive tackle. He's 6'3", 292. So they actually have decent size. And then, of course, they have an edge rusher who's 6'2", 209. They'll bring some kids off the bench with some decent size as too, Ryan. But like their number 2 defensive end, 6'3", 251. Their number 2 defensive tackle, 6'2", 273. Their number 2 nose guard who will play a decent amount is 6'2", 273. They have an edge player named Jordan Sanders that'll play who's 6'5", 227. So they're not big, but they're a little bigger than Syracuse was at linebacker and defensive line, but it still should be certainly a size advantage for Notre Dame. No question about it. Similar to Syracuse.
Yes, I would agree with that. I mean, the one thing that they do well is they do play with good leverage, right? Like they're one of those teams that they understand they're undersized. And I mean, we came into the Syracuse game kind of thinking the same thing, right? Like these defensive linemen aren't the biggest guys in the world, but they understand their limitations. They understand their strengths. So Navy's going to come and they're going to challenge, right? And I mean, obviously size advantage wise, you would hope that a combination of Zeke Correll and Jared Patterson, Josh Lugg would be able to dig out a 6 foot, 256 pound nose tackle. But, until it happens, right? So that's kind of the interesting conversation.
And the good thing is they've had to do that recently. They did that 2 weeks ago. So, and that's one of the times where Zeke Correll's lack of ideal height helps him a ton in matchups like this, And so that's why I've always said, I don't think Zeke's height is the issue people make it out to be. I think it helps him get under the pads of bigger defensive tackles, and I think it helps him root out guys like this. So I think it's his length and height is something that I think is a little overplayed. If you want to say maybe he's not really 308, okay, we can maybe have that conversation. But I think we've seen this year that Zeke Correll's size is not an issue for him at this point in time.
No doubt.
Remember I said the Notre Dame run game against the Navy pass game or Navy run defense was good on good?
Yep.
Well, this is the bad on bad matchup. The Notre Dame pass offense against the Navy pass defense. I am going to say something that I have not said in a long time. Notre Dame has the edge statistically in pass game with their offense over their opponent. This is the difference from Navy a few years ago when they had a really good defense, Ryan. If you go back and watch like that 2015 team especially, they had legit low power 5 level athletes in the secondary, especially at corner. They don't have that this year. That's the weakness of their team is their secondary is just not good. And you can see it here. Now, here's what some people say. Well, the reason Navy's really good at rushing defense is because teams can't throw on them. That's only true if you look at yards. The thing, and that's why the other metrics are important because they're very good at yards per attempt as well without a lot of sacks. And so you can't just say it's 88 factors into the fact that teams just throw on them. But okay, so they'd be 105 if teams, ran more, if they were better against the pass. They'd still be a very good rush defense for their level. Right. But you look at this as bad as Notre Dame has been this year, Ryan, it's still significantly greater. They hold an advantage against them in almost every statistical category, with the exception of yards per game, and they're one ranking spot off. So I can't believe I'm going to say it, but this is advantage Notre Dame. And honestly, Ryan, and we'll get into this more in the keys tomorrow because this will be one of our keys to the game. This is a week where the Notre Dame pass offense has to find something that it can hang its hat on. These next 2 weeks especially, but this week especially, this has to be a confidence-building game for the Notre Dame pass attack, for Drew Pine, for the receivers. I don't want to see Michael Mayer catch 13 balls for 150 yards. I don't want to see Notre Dame run it 60 times for 290 yards against Navy. I don't. I want to see Notre Dame run the ball and be who you are. Got to be who you are. But within that, let's maybe start cranking up some of the stuff in the throwing game that you want to get going, that you need to get going against USC and in the postseason. Let's start getting that cranked up because this is the week where you can start to kind of build up some confidence in those areas.
We have talked about get right games in the past. Like this is a get right opportunity for the passing attack of Notre Dame. Like this is it, man. Like if it doesn't happen this week, then folks, it's not going to happen this year. It's just not going to, man. I mean, this is it's really weird to say a team that averages only 184 yards passing a game has a clear advantage in this game, but I mean, they do. They do athletically. It's not even close. I mean, they have a clear advantage. They'll have guys open. Navy also doesn't get a ton of pressure on the quarterback, so there will be opportunities, especially if Notre Dame is able to run the football like we know that they can, and they're going to have some clear ability to, get guys open while protecting the passer. So this is the ultimate. If it's not going to happen this week, it's never going to happen for you type of situation, man. Like there's no excuse for not having a more productive passing attack. Does it have to be groundbreaking? No. Does it have to be record setting? No. It has to be better though, for sure. Right. I mean, you can't leave this game with 90 yards passing, right? Like that is like,
could you? Yeah, you could blow Navy out with 90 passing yards.
I was going to say
that doesn't make this. No, I get what you're saying, Ryan. Yeah. I'm adding to what you're saying. I'm not disagreeing with you at all. I promise. Yep. I'm adding to it that could you do that and still win by 3-4 touchdowns? Sure. Does that make you a better football team? No, it doesn't. You have to build on who you are right now.
Like you said before, I mean, Notre Dame could run the ball every single play during this game, and they could blow this team out. Like, they're that talented, right? Like, they could do that. So they could control this game. They could control the line of scrimmage. They'll never have to throw the football. But did that make you a better team than you were coming into the football game? That's my biggest point, right? Like there's a growth opportunity here in the passing game. And I know we've talked about this in some other weeks as well, but you're going against a team that is not only not very good technically against the pass, but also there's a big talent gap, a big talent advantage. So this is an opportunity for Notre Dame to take full advantage of this matchup.
All right. We'll need to spend a lot of time on that matchup because it's not a pretty one. Scoring offense against the scoring defense. This is where it's a little bit more evenly matched statistically. We've seen Notre Dame take a bit of a jump in red zone offense the last couple weeks, Ryan. I think that's been one of the things that has helped this team in the last few games. Notre Dame in their last 2 games have had 9 red zone opportunities against Syracuse and Clemson, and they've scored touchdowns on 7 of them, which is a really good rate. That's kind of like right into that wheelhouse of where you want to be one of the better red zone teams in the country. I mean, if you just look at like the rate they've had the last 2 weeks, Ryan, and you put it out over the course of the entire season, they're tied for 7th in red zone touchdown rate. That's how good they've been the last 2 weeks, right? So I think I just throw out a number, 77.8%, and you're probably like, okay, well, what does that mean? Right. Well, that would tie them with Eastern Michigan for 7th in the country if you expanded that over the course of the entire season. They'd be behind Charlotte, Mississippi State, Ohio State, Maryland, Penn State, North Carolina, and they'd be tied for 7th with Eastern Michigan at that point in time, ahead of Tennessee, ahead of USC. Now, if you look at the last 3 games and you expand it out a little bit more, they had some missed opportunities against UNLV, as we talked about that week. But even then, they're 12 of 17, which puts them at 70.6, which still has them 24th in the country. So they're definitely trending in a better direction when it comes to putting the ball in the end zone. The problem still is, Ryan, they're just not getting enough red zone opportunities because they're still not moving the ball with the kind of consistency you need. You know, all those numbers we said are good and everything, but when you look at Notre Dame's red zone opportunities, they rank 60th in the country. Mm-hmm. Now, the context to that is, well, you could say, well, some teams, rank lower in red zone offense because red zone opportunities because they score big plays a lot. That's sure, but you'd have to be one heck of a big play team to be 60th in the country in red zone opportunities and have a good offense. They just don't get the ball in the red zone enough. That has to change against Navy. Now, Navy's red zone defense has been really good. Mm-hmm. So I mean that number right there, Ryan, 13 to 29, that number surprised me. Navy's not letting people get into the red zone a whole lot, and the reason for that is, if you look up there at that yards per play average, 112th. That's going to be a key for me this week, Ryan. We're going to talk about that tomorrow in our keys to the game, is the big plays, but Notre Dame will get into the red zone. Mm-hmm. They've got to continue to punch it in and get 6. And obviously the ground game is going to be a piece of that, but this is the week where I'd like to really see them maybe take a couple looks at some things that they like in the red zone pass game wise. And not just Michael Mayer only. Fine, if you want to use Michael Mayer, that's cool. He better be a red zone weapon. But in these kind of situations, I wouldn't mind saying, hey, let's give Deion Colesy or Tobias Merriweather a fade into the end zone on the 14-yard line this week. Let's do something like that to try to see if we can get that part of our game going as well. Because if you can add that as a weapon in the red zone, Ryan, it makes Audric Estime and Logan Diggs and the run game even more effective once you get inside the 15-yard line.
This is the most maddening thing that I'm going to say all day, Brian, and it's really sad. The fact that 29.1 points per game is starting to make me happy, considering we were at like 22 for like 4 straight weeks. Like it was
it doesn't really make me happier though, Ryan, because if you look at it, a lot of that's coming from non-offensive parts of the team. I mean, they have scored 3 non-offensive touchdowns in the last 2 games. And so I get what you're saying. I do, but it's kind of like it's that glimmer of hope kind of thing. But look, the reality is if you take out just the direct touchdowns, like the touchdowns that the defense actually got, they're only at 26.8. And that's just the last 2 games. That doesn't include other scores they've gotten. And it also doesn't include, for example, the drive against Syracuse where they got the ball at the 2-yard line. I mean, I still even counted that for the defense or the offense. If you take that out, this is still a team that's only averaging 26 points per game, way below where they need to be. This is a game where you try to get right against a Navy team that's going to control you're going to have limited possessions in this game. You probably, I mean, if Notre Dame's defense eats Navy up, then maybe they do have to 10 possessions. But, usually looking at like 6 to 8 against this team. You got to be very efficient with the football. And when you get your chance to get 7, you got to get 7. I mean, and that's going to be a big key. And, of course, part of that comes with protecting the football. Navy's been a decent turnover team this year on defense. That's been one of their few saving graces is they actually have a decent, ranked 36th in turnovers gained. That's obviously a positive for them.
And it looks like, because if I remember correctly, they've only intercepted 6 passes. So that means they've recovered 9 fumbles, right, which is very opportunistic.
Yes. So you see right there, Ryan, they've given up 20 touchdown passes, but they've given up 6. They've picked off 6 passes. So to your point, 9 fumbles. And that means they're putting the ball, they're forcing the ball to get put on the ground. That or they have the best luck in the world. I mean, teams don't lose 9 fumbles against you if they're just undisciplined and dropping the ball. It means you're doing things to create those mistakes, and that's going to be a key for a Notre Dame team that going in the last couple of games is going to be, has been an issue at times. We had one question, Ryan, from Lucas Deason. Will Notre Dame need to pass against Navy, though? Yeah, and that's kind of our point is it depends on what you refer to by need. Do they need to in regard to beat Navy? No, but this is not a game that's just about beating Navy. That's not how, to me, that's not how coaching works. Like, we got something we know we're going to need to do down the road against USC that we're not doing right now. This is one of those games you start to introduce that. So by the time you get to USC, it's not the first time that you've really worked on it, trying to get good at it. Yep. So do they need it to beat Navy? No. Mm-hmm. Do they need to do it to make themselves a better football team? Absolutely. And we'll talk more about that tomorrow.
Without a question.
Ryan, let's go to the matchup of the Notre Dame defense against the Navy offense. This is going to be a very intriguing matchup. Navy is running for a lot of yards, nationally speaking, but they're well behind where they used to be. And if you look at the other metrics of it, you can see that they're not a really good rushing attack. Now, to make matters worse, their starting quarterback, Ty Lavate, is not going to play. He is going to miss. He's out for the year. So they're going to be playing with their backup quarterback, who has been Xavier Arline, who's actually kind of decent runner, Ryan. I mean, he's actually had some pretty good production. He's coming off of 12 carries for 87 yards against Cincinnati. I will say this: he's not as I would say masterful with the option as the starter was, but I'd say he's a more dynamic athlete than the starter was. So I think he presents a little bit more opportunities that way. And he's going to be making, I believe, his 3rd start in a row against Notre Dame. So, that should help him. But if you look at his last 3 games, he was thrust into the lineup. I believe that Ty got hurt against Houston, if I remember correctly, Ryan. And that kid was thrust into the game then. So he's basically played 2.5 games, but he's run for 172 yards in his last 3 games. He's ran for 141 in his last 2 games. That puts you on pace for over 800 yards in a regular season. That's good production from the Navy quarterback, not great production. So you look at that and you say, okay, they're going to run the ball. They're going to try to get their numbers, but this is not the kind of team you look at, Ryan, and say they don't present you with the same dangers that they've had in the past. And I think a big problem is they're not real great at running back, but the bigger problem, their fullback production leaves a lot to be desired. Their starting fullback, Anton Hall, averages 3.3 yards per carry. Their other fullback, Daba Fofana, averages, let's see here, where'd he go? I just had him there. Where did I put him? Let's see here. Their other fullback, let's see here. Logan Point is also in that mix. He is at 138 yards in the season, 4.2 yards per carry. They're just not a real Ryan, they're just not a real great rushing team. I'm sorry. Daba is a slot back, or he's their fullback. He averages 3. He's their starting fullback. Excuse me. He averages 3.6 yards per carry. He's their leading rusher, but 3.6 yards per carry. We were talking the other day about that really good 2015 team that they had, and their starting fullback that year, Chris Swain, was a 4.9 yards per carry. But if you remember, they had that little bowling ball behind him, Quentin Ezell. He was their number 2 fullback, and he ran for 5.1 yards per carry. So that's where they like to be. I mean, that's where you want your fullbacks to be. If you go back to the 09, remember the 09 team that beat Notre Dame, Vince Murray was their starting fullback. He was at 5.3 yards per carry. And if you remember this name, Alexander Teach, he was the guy that ripped Notre Dame up. He went for 5.4 yards per carry. And then the next year, Teach becomes a starter in the go-to guy. He was at 5.9 yards per carry. So I'm giving you context of where their fullback position is. Starter 3.6, backup 3.3. The next guy, Logan Point, who's their third fullback, is 4.2. When you're only averaging 3-point-something yards per carry at fullback, and your quarterback is not a Ricky Dobbs or a Keenan Reynolds, those two things then play off each other in a negative way. When you're good at both, they play off each other in a positive way. Being good at fullback makes your quarterback better, and if your quarterback's good, it makes your fullback better. But the same thing is true on the opposite side, which is while their yards may be high, Ryan, their yards per attempt are not high. And so statistically, this is a game that Notre Dame needs to be able to handle this attack.
Well, and I was going to say, Brian, the fullback position being what it is right now, or the dive back position, depending on how you want to classify it, it being what it is right now for Navy, like that's how the whole triple option functions, right? Like then you have to give more resources to stop in the dive, the inside run, and then that's when, oh wow, and then we're a guy short on the pitch outside, and that's kind of where the success kind of really sprouts from, is the ability to run the ball up the middle and to have that fullback dive working. So it's not a great rushing team in a vacuum, right? Like, again, the volume stats kind of are misleading. The 9th best rushing team in the country, but if you watch the efficiency of the rush offense, just not there. I think you said something perfectly to start this conversation of there's not much dynamic ability with this rushing attack, right? Like, I mean, there's going to be a slot back always that has a high yards per carry because he's only getting – not a high volume of touches, and he's just getting outside pitches when no one's home. But for the most part, there's not anybody that really terrifies you to break a big run, right? Like, this is kind of let's hope that we get 3 runs and the first down off of 3-point-something yards a carry. Like, this is what this team is this year. And that's Notre Dame has to keep them there, but also you have to force them into some things that are going to make them uncomfortable, trying to get the ball in the perimeter in different ways, trying to pass the football on maybe some early downs, like those types of things. I think is how you beat this team, is to make them uncomfortable. They do not want to operate that way.
Well, I'll give you some more context, Ryan, because the slot backs are a byproduct of how good you are at other positions, right? Now, that doesn't mean it's not good to have good slot backs. I'm not saying that at all. But what I'm saying is the slot back production is not going to be good if you're not good at the other positions. And so, you look at where they're at now, Ryan, with their production in the slot. Their top slot back, Mikael Haywood, is at 6.4 yards per carry, which is fine. Vincent Terrell's at 3.3 yards per carry. Their next, Daniel Jones, is at 4.3 yards per carry.
Okay. Not great.
It's not great. Let's put it into context. The 2019 team, which is the last really good Navy team, I believe, that rushed for over 300 yards. They have not been over 300 yards since 2019. Think about that for Navy's offense. And you look at that team, their slot backs that year, you had 8.3, 7.2, 7.1, and 5.3. You look at 2015, the last year, the year they had Keenan Reynolds. Here's their slot back production, Ryan. 10-5, 7-5, 7-2, 15-8 was what they got from their slot back production. Why? Because they were dynamic at quarterback and fullback. And so you had to really focus a lot of resources on that, and they're pitching that sucker out to wide. They're just grass. I think here's another thing that's hurt Navy's triple option. Not being able to cut on the perimeter has really hurt the perimeter part of this rushing attack. It is a lot harder to be effective on the perimeter with the pitch game when you can't cut block and put guys on the ground. That rule change has hurt the triple option. It really has. I'm glad, because it's a very dangerous block anyway. It's even more dangerous in space, in my opinion, which is why I didn't like teaching it. And I actually fought the one triple option team I coached on. I fought the coach on it nonstop because I think there's better ways to do it the way that we did it. But Navy has not adjusted well to not being able to cut. I think that has impacted their pitch game as well, and partly why you're seeing the slot numbers go way down in the last few years since those rules have really gone into effect.
Man, I would hate being an alley runner and having to deal with cut blocks in space, man. Like that is not fun. It is not. And I mean, again, Brian, slot backs are the byproduct of the successful inside run, because then you're a player short working outside, and then that quarterback gets the ball out late. And to your point, you're running to grass at that point. You're not running to, beat a guy one-on-one. You are literally just running to the corner until you can't stop. 10.5 yards a carry that you're a Malcolm Perry. That is a silly number, man. Like, that is absurd. But those guys also aren't getting a ton of touches, like they're the third part of the triple option. That's what they are.
Like, yeah. So to your point, Ryan, like in 2015, for example, their top slot back, Deshaun Romine, you remember him? He was really good, actually. He had 36 carries. Their number 2, DeBrandon Sanders, had 42 carries. And the only reason Deshaun had fewer carries is because he was at 10.5 per attempt, where DeBrandon Sanders was 42. Damon Brown was at 32. So their slot backs, as Tonio Gully, remember him? He was at 15.8. Calvin Cass was their next guy at 16 carries. He was at 8.8. But it was 36, 42, 32, 12, 16. That's what the numbers they were putting up. And so you'll rip off 10, 15, and then the occasional 50-yard gain, and the yards per attempt are going to be really high. But even if you add all of them together, it's a lot. That's over 100 touches at 7, 8, 9 yards a carry. And again, but it all boils down to being good inside. If you're not good inside, you can't be good outside. And then when you add that combination of the blocking, you're seeing why Navy's just not nearly as efficient as they used to be when it comes to running football. Up front, they're actually kind of big if you look at them compared to the past Navy teams. Their left tackle, left guard are 6'3", 265 and 6'3", 262, typical size for Navy. Their center, Mertezi, is 6'3", 315. The right guard, Joshua Pena, is 6'2", 286. And the right tackle, Kip Franklin, is 6'1", 306. So size-wise, they actually have a little bit of beef compared to past years. They're not as long as they've been. If you remember in 15, I think it was, they had like a pair of 6'5" offensive tackles that were like 280 each. They were really good football players. That's the other area. They're just not as good up front as they used to have been. They're just not the same program that they used to be. But they're still dangerous if you're undisciplined, and that's going to be the key for Notre Dame.
Without a doubt.
Let's go to the other side of the ball. This is going to be the Notre Dame. Let's see here. This is actually not the number that I wanted. Let's go here. This is the Notre Dame rush defense against the Navy. Actually, no, we're on the other side of the ball. Man, I'm having one of those days, Ryan. Let's go to the pass game.
Mm-hmm.
Navy always has weird pass stats, Ryan. They're always going to rank near the bottom of the country in yards per game. They're always going to rank near the bottom of the country in touchdowns. They're always going to rank in the bottom of the country in in completion percentage. They're always going to rank pretty high in yards per completion and yards per attempt. And this year is really no different. They actually have some decent pass catchers, right? It's just they don't have guys that can really throw the ball. And that's something that I think really helps them. Our line and Ty, neither one of them throw the ball very well. Mm-hmm. And so there's not that's something that kills them. They actually have, I don't know if you agree with this, right? I actually think they have decent pass catchers, like for them, for Navy. Yeah. I actually have decent pass catchers this year. They just they don't have anybody throwing the ball. They really don't. And you've got to make sure that continues in this game, Ryan.
I know there's a couple other military teams, Brian, but I can't believe 19 yards of completion is third in college football. Like, that's a silly, silly number, man. I mean, we talked about it yesterday a little bit on the show last night, right? It's like they're running waggle and they're running a bunch of stuff that, vertically down the seams. They're throwing the ball over your head after you've kind of gotten lulled to sleep in the run game. And it's
post seams and wheels, man. That's what they do. Post seams and wheels. I mean, that's really what it boils down to for them. It really
and their efficiency is never going to be high either, because, like you said, the completion percentage is never going to be high, and all that type of situation. So this is one thing though where Notre Dame's secondary does need to be disciplined, right? Yes. Like they need to be. You need to be. You can't, if you're a safety against this defense that's going to run the alley, you have to be take a nice read step to make sure, because you're still a pass first football player if you're in the secondary, right? So don't get too antsy. Don't get too, hamstrung on trying to make a play in the run game, because if you do make a mistake and you do get lulled to sleep, Navy does have a chance to create a couple big plays. Notre Dame obviously has the better talent outside, inside, everywhere from a passing game perspective. But they need to be consistent in their approach against the triple option, because this is where, one bad step, one false step, and then that's where a big play happens.
Absolutely. Ryan, just to follow up on your comment earlier, the Navy is number 3. The number 1 team in the country in yards per completion is Air Force at 22.3. Okay. Number 2 is Army at 22.0. So yes. Nice. And then the next closest, Navy's at 19. The next closest is North Texas at 16.1. And the next closest after that is Tennessee at 15. So you get away from the triple option and there's a big drop off between those teams and everybody else. So it's just the nature of the offense. They're always going to be there. Doesn't
Yep.
mean that they're dangerous, because some years they have that high yards, and they're just not dangerous. And that's the thing is if you play discipline, this Navy team is not dangerous throwing the football. In past years, they have been, because they've had quarterbacks and throw it over your head, and receivers can go make plays. Like Jameer Tillman could outplay you for the football.
Yep.
And they've had some guys that were really athletic, where they had some slots that could really run and get isolated on linebackers. The team's trying to play 4-4, and they run a post wheel concept, and your linebackers chasing this little 5'9" kid whose feet are moving 100 miles an hour, and they just hit that big play on you. Because but this team, Ryan, to your point, the danger for this team is more about you not being disciplined than it is Navy necessarily beating you.
Yes,
and that's the key.
I mean, because Jameer Tillman was a kid that, like, if I was an NFL team, and I'm pretty sure they did, like, come into a camp, sir. Like, let's see what you can kind of work with.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because he's that type of talent. I mean, he's like a 6'4" kid that could run a little bit.
Yeah.
I agree that I think Navy's got a couple decent pass catchers, but they don't have a Jameer Tillman out there, right? Like, there's no guy like that out there. But I mean, at the end of the day, man, this could be the difference between having a great game defensively or having a game that you kind of just shake your head about a little bit if you give up a couple long plays off of the play action or off the waggle and all that type of stuff. So this is going to test Notre Dame from a discipline perspective. This is going to test Notre Dame from a just consistency perspective. And you have to be able to just kind of maintain your discipline, because Navy will take a shot at some point in this game. Like, there's no doubt about that.
Now, the thing with Jameer Tillman, Ryan, the thing that hurt him is, if you remember correctly, he was getting ready for the draft, and he had a lot of teams looking at him. But the military, like right before the draft that year, changed their rule. They used to allow kids to kind of play in the NFL first before they serve, but then they changed the rule, and they forced them to serve their 2 year. Forced them. I mean, you signed up for it. You knew it. I mean, but when you signed up, and this is why Alohi Gilman left, because when Alohi signed up, they had a rule that if you were able to play in a professional sport, you could delay your service to the military academy, and to the military, I should say, not the academy. Well, then they changed that rule in Alohi Gilman's first year, and he's like, I didn't sign up for that. I signed up with this knowing that I would serve my country, but I'd get this opportunity because I don't have that window, right? If I go serve, and no one's going to want me in 2 to 5 years, you know what I mean?
Right.
And so that's what hurt Jameer Tillman, was that. So disappointing, I think, obviously, was when that decision was made.
Fortunately, I think they did reverse that rule, so now
eventually
guys can have that opportunity, luckily.
Yeah.
So.
Yep, absolutely. And then last, Ryan, is the scoring offense against the Navy scoring defense, or the Navy scoring offense against the Notre Dame scoring defense. And in most of these areas, Notre Dame dominates. Notre Dame is 27th in the country in scoring defense. And when you consider how bad their offense has been, and you consider the fact that they've played some really good scoring offenses this year, Notre Dame's pretty good. I believe Notre Dame has still held every single team they've played this year under their season scoring average. And when you look at when they played, it was at least by a touchdown, I think, in all but one game, I believe.
Probably the Marshall game, right? Was the exception.
Well, if you only count with the points that Marshall scored on offense, it was like 8. It was actually the Cal game at the time.
Gotcha.
Was I believe the one, but a couple of those teams have had some games since then that dragged their numbers down a little bit, but they have held every team that they've played this year under their scoring average. So if that continues against Navy, then you're going to see pretty big drop off when you look at what the kind of numbers are going to produce. But they don't move the ball well. They don't move it. They don't get a lot of yards. They don't get a lot of points. They don't get a lot of yards per play. They're not very good in the red zone. The red zone touchdown rate is the one that really shocks me. Right.
That's really low for this type of offense.
Yes. That's where you don't want to be against Navy, is you don't want to be in the red zone against them because they're usually pretty good. Here's an example. They're at 50%. Again, context, right? You talk about why Navy struggles. They're 50% rate right now, ranked 108th in the country. In 2019, the last year they were good, they were second in the nation in red zone touchdown rate at 79.6. In 2015, they led the nation at 75.9. And then in 2009, with Ricky Dobbs, they were 15th. And in 2010, that next year was 11th. So way down from where they used to be. Third down offense is decent, but third down's really, you know what I should have done for this one, Ryan? I should have put their fourth down stats on there because this is a team that like third down is just they're just not the same team as everybody else when it comes to third down because they will go for it on fourth down a ton. And, the key for you is you just want to try to limit those opportunities. For example, they are fourth in the country tied for second in the country in fourth down opportunities.
Wow.
And they convert over 50. They're actually a lot better on fourth down than they are third down. As you can see, they convert 41.1% of their third downs. This year, they're converting. Let me find it here, Ryan. Actually, let me see. Third down. That's third down. Let me go to fourth down. Navy this year is tied for second in the country or tied for third in the country at conversion rate on fourth down at 54.84.
Wow.
So yeah, they have converted 17 fourth downs this year, which is tied for fourth in the total number. Texas Tech leads the nation with 42 attempts. Big analytics team there. So the next closest team is 31. So you got to be prepared for that. Put them in as many fourth and longs as possible because they'll go for it on 4th and 9 at midfield, but they're usually going to throw or they'll run their outside stuff, but they'll try to throw and more in those downs, and that's where you want them to be. You want them to be a throwing team. There's no doubt about it.
I love analytics. I love analytics.
Yeah, whatever. So that's the matchup between the Notre Dame Fighting Irish and the Navy Midshipmen. Statistically, he starts off a really intriguing matchup, Ryan, a really good run defense against a really good rushing offense. But after that, it kind of goes way down. Yep. And you see, that's why Navy's 3-6. Okay, it makes more sense now because they just don't do some of the things well that they used to do well. They don't move the chains as well. They don't put the ball in the end zone as well.
They turn the ball over a decent amount too for their style.
For them, yeah. Especially the interceptions was one that I found to be like, wow, that's for a team that doesn't throw the ball much.
They're 5, I think.
You guys have thrown a decent amount of like 5 interceptions. Yeah. Let me see, what are their pass attempts on the year? Just more than maybe they are in other years because they have to throw. But yeah, they've thrown 108 and they average 12 passes a game, and they've thrown 5 interceptions on the season. So
and Notre Dame's thrown 6, and they throw the ball obviously a lot more than Navy does. So
and like that 8.3 yards per attempt, which ranks in the top ranks some 27th. That's still way down. I mean, they were 11.9 in 2019. They were with Will Worth in 2016. They were 11.4. With Keenan Reynolds, they were 10.5. And even Ricky Dobbs, who of those guys that we just mentioned was without question the least effective passer compared to Keenan Reynolds and Will Worth. Even then, they were like almost 10. They were 9.9 in 2010 and 9.6 in 2009. So, I mean, they've really taken a step back when it comes to throwing the football, and it's kind of disappointing to see because I don't know. I've always kind of felt I wanted Navy to be successful, other than when they played Notre Dame. Sure. But they're not good. So advantage Notre Dame in all those areas, Ryan. That's going to do it for this portion of the podcast. We will do a quick mailbag next. We do have some questions I want to get to, not a lot. So if you have some more, you can put them in now. But we're going to try to knock out as many as possible. But before we head to the mailbag, I would appreciate it if you all would do us a favor and hit that like button. Hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast, sign up for the message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. We had somebody earlier ask Ryan how they can buy, where Henry, the hard ace, says, where can I purchase IB gear? Well, if you're listening to this on YouTube, or watching and or listening to this on YouTube, there's a link below to the Irish Breakdown store. If you are listening via podcast, obviously I'll give you the address now. But if you're an Irish Breakdown member of the message board, you can obviously go to the site, and at the very top, there's a section called IB Store. Just click on that. It'll take you right there. If you're not on the message board, go to ibstore.irishbreakdown.com. IB meaning Irish Breakdown. So ibstore.irishbreakdown.com. So, Ryan, it is mailbag time. Let's get to some of these mailbag questions. D. Trollhunter says, back to the topic at hand. Brian, who are the Navy game wreckers this year? Usually defensively, they have a few good impact players. There's no Andre Carter for this team, Ryan, who is the star from Army. But let's talk about some of the kids. They, like I said, the front seven, Navy has some quality football players. I don't know, Ryan, if I would say I'll give my 2 cents and then you give yours.
Okay.
I think John Marshall's a pretty good football player, and I like Jacob Busick. But even then, I don't know if I'd call any of those guys game wreckers. But just production-wise alone, John Marshall, who's their star, that's literally his position. Not star player, but that's literally his position. He's the guy that production-wise is the guy you have to be careful for. He's 10 double-digit tackles for loss. I mean, he's a guy that can make some plays in the backfield.
Yeah, and he looks kind of like a safety, but again, he's kind of that star position. So he's playing a lot of overhang, playing in space. Where's number one for them? And he is the guy. Yeah, he's that guy that can do a little bit of everything. He's a pretty productive player around the football. I wouldn't call him a game wrecker by any stretch, but I mean, he is clearly like pretty substantially their best defensive player, in my opinion.
Agree. Their D line is not bad. I mean, it really isn't. I mean, for their level, I'm not talking about the matchup against Notre Dame now at all. But but you look at their Bernard kid, he's got 4.5 tackles for loss as a nose guard. We talked about Busick's got 6.5 tackles for loss. The other D tackles got 4.5 tackles for loss. I mean, that's 10, 14, 15 tackles for loss from a defense that their down linemen don't often do that.
Right.
Their all down linemen are usually just gap eaters. Their kids actually do a little bit of production. They do a little bit more penetrating this year with them than they have in the past. But, like you said, their linebackers when their defense is really good, their linebackers outside and inside are really good players. And
they lost their game record from last year. They had the Diego Fago kid, who was a really good football player.
Yep.
But to your point, they don't have
ever.
I know, man. It really did seem like he was there for like 7 years.
To your point, Ryan, he had 3 straight years he was an inside backer, correct?
Yeah. Yes.
As an inside linebacker, he had 3 straight years with double-digit tackles for loss.
It's a good player,
That's
man.
really good. That's really good for an inside linebacker. Yeah, no doubt. Next question from Notre Dame 2164. Some people just trying to get me today, Ryan. My guy, Notre Dame 2164. He's one of the OGs at Irish Breakdown, so I'm going to let him slide on this one. So, Brian, what should Notre Dame's plan be on Saturday, seeing how the triple option is unbeatable? We'll do a deeper dive into this tomorrow night. Jesse Stiers and I are going to do a little bit of a deep dive into the triple option and break down kind of some of the things that they do tomorrow night. But honestly, it's just about having a plan that accounts for the fullback and quarterback and then being disciplined on the perimeter. It really is. It's, a lot of people will read and react the triple option. I don't love a read and react against triple option. I think you can be too aggressive against it, Ryan. So like when I say being aggressive, I don't mean like everybody blitz and you send there, because that's when they pitch it outside of you and you miss the fullback dive and one guy hits the gap wrong and there's nobody there. He's gone.
Right.
I'm not talking about that. What I'm talking about is fire off the ball. Don't let their linemen get to the second level. Attack the dive. Attack the quarterback.
Attack the quarterback. Don't slow play the pitch. Like that type of thing.
Make him declare now. So attack inside, feather outside. Right, like where you want to string things along is on the perimeter. You don't want to let them string the option around. Now, there are certain looks where I do like that. When they're doing like the speed option or things like that, that's when you do kind of want to play inside out and push it to the sideline. But the pure veer, you want to attack that now. You really want to attack that now. When they're doing those type of things, you want to attack it. When they're trying to do the perimeter stuff, because they'll do some speed option, they'll do some things where they do a quick dive and then they want to get kind of going. I'm okay stringing that stuff out, Ryan. But when it comes to the dive, the biggest thing is make him decide to give the fullback dive or pull now.
Yeah.
Right now.
And I'd also say it's assignment sound stuff, right? I mean, one interesting thing about Navy this year, Brian, is like it's not just your traditional double wing triple option, right? Like they run a lot of single wing stuff. They'll even run some wham stuff off of a single wing look where I'm like, what the heck is that? I've never seen that before. But they're going to do some stuff that's going to try to make you guess wrong or make you confused. But at the end of the day, it's, hey, who's your guy that has the dive? Who's your guy that has the quarterback? Who's your guy that has the pitch? What is your assignment? Stay true to your assignments. That's the biggest thing with this option offense. And that isn't even just a triple option offense. Any option offense in general, assignment sound. What's your responsibility? What's your responsibility? Be true to your key. if you're able to do that, then you'll be all right.
Next question, Ryan, is from Charles Drury. Question for Ryan Roberts. Do you think Estime can hit 1,000 yards this season?
He's at what,
662.
662 with 3 regular season games left and then a bowl game, right? So 4 games to get 330 something yards.
I mean,
yes.
Yeah. There's no doubt. I mean,
what's that, 80 yards a game or so, somewhere?
Well, if you just look at the regular season, Ryan, and just look at the regular season and say, what is his need? He only needs 112.7 yards per game in the regular season to get to 1,000 in the regular season. It's 84.5 for the whole season, if you include the bowl game. And then if you look at Logan Diggs, who has 545 yards and 1 less game, Logan Diggs needs 151.7 to get to 1,000 in the regular season. If you look at Logan Diggs for the course of the season, he only needs 113.8 in the next four games. So it's
wild.
It's not inconceivable that Notre Dame has 2 guys with 1,000 yards this year. And Chris Tyree sitting there at 348.
Yeah.
Like, you could conceivably have 2,000-yard rushers and a guy over 500 yards this year for Notre Dame.
Right. You know what I'm so mad about, man, is that you remember one of my big hot take predictions in the preseason was that there'd be 4 guys to go over 500 plus yards for Notre Dame. Of course, it's not going to happen now because Tyler Buckner got hurt.
Right.
Right.
Right. Because if Buckner wasn't hurt, you'd have like a 1,000-yard guy, a 700-yard guy, a 500-yard guy, and then Buckner.
Exactly.
That's kind of what you'd be looking at. So, yeah. But
I mean, I'll say this, though. It is wild that Notre Dame has opportunity to potentially have 2,000-yard rushers on the season with how poorly the season started after the first 2 games.
117 rushing yards per game after 3 games.
It's absurd, man.
Yeah.
Absurd.
It really is impressive what they've done. It really is impressive what they've done in the last 6 games. So they just got to keep that rolling because they're going to need that success moving forward. All right, the next question that we have here, Ryan, is from Brent Smith. I'm a little concerned about all these programs still trying to flip so many of our 2023 class. Can I speak to this real quick, Ryan, and then you can address the specific players because we have questions about it.
Yep.
I think Notre Dame fans need to reset their minds. If the best teams in the country or good teams are not trying to flip your commits, that's a problem. It means nobody wants your players. Because nobody's going to be I don't care if Notre Dame was undefeated right now and went out and won the national championship, teams would still try to flip their players. They would. Now, they may not do so successfully, but they're still going to try. If teams aren't trying to flip your players, then you don't have the players that people want. If BC or Indiana are trying to flip your players, then you probably don't have very good players, right? It's a good thing. And I think that people are also, Ryan, falling victim to clickbait, if I'm being honest. And we'll have a lot more to say about that on signing day. But here's Braylon James. We addressed this. There was literally a published article from one of the major recruiting services last week talking about how Braylon James is a flip candidate at TCU. And when we can talk to people that are very connected to him who would know, they not only said it's incorrect, they said that person's a liar. That's not our words. It's not our words. That's their words, right? Jaden Greathouse visiting Texas. It's another one that people are, I think, making a lot more out of than is there. Dylan Edwards to Kansas State. I mean, look, that's the one that I'm told there's nothing to worry about. But anytime your dad was a really good player to school and it's right there, you get concerned. But, I mean, you look at his social media action, Ryan. I mean, and then, of course, the last one, and I'll let you address this one, Ryan, is Peyton Bowen. Yep. But you can talk about Peyton, you can talk about the others. But honestly, y'all, this is why you need to be on the message board because we will shoot you straight. If there's a reason to be worried, we'll tell you. We will.
Yep.
And we're not going to give you clickbait because it's a premium board. We don't get paid for clicks. And if we're putting out hot takes that constantly prove to be wrong, then people are going to rightly lose faith in us and not want to subscribe. It does us no good to put out stuff that's not accurate. We need it even more than others because we don't put it out in free articles where we can make some money off of it. We put it behind a paywall for a reason. So I just want to remind you all of that. Stop reading the clickbait because 99% of it's just bull crap. did we share the Jeremiah Love story yet on this platform, Ryan?
I don't think so.
So here's an example.
Yeah.
On3 did a story about Jeremiah Love, and I believe they said they're hearing that he's leaning towards Texas A&M, correct?
Yes.
And then another 24/7 sports writer wrote that he was hearing from his Texas people a very similar thing. Here's what y'all need to know. He had already committed to Notre Dame, and him and his dad were already talking to Ryan about doing the commitment video with us. So people are on our board freaking out, and we're like, just calm down, don't worry. Now, we're not going to tell you he's committed because that's not our news to break. But that's how absurd this stuff is, where it's like, wait a minute, you're saying that you're hearing he's leaning towards A&M when literally 5 days ago he already committed to Notre Dame and is talking to us at that moment, that very day. Ryan, his dad, and Jeremiah were starting to put together the plans of the commitment video that we eventually did with him. Yep. Like, that's how absurd this stuff is getting, and that's why we try to tell y'all, stick with us, and you'll get honest information from us.
I literally had done the one-on-one interview with Jeremiah when that thing came out.
Recorded a video about him talking about being committed to Notre Dame when those articles came out.
Man, it's so frustrating. And like, I mean, we could take every one of those for a large like different vantage points, right? I mean, we'll talk about the Peyton Bowen stuff, if and when he signs with Notre Dame, because there's been a lot of misinformation about that one specifically. The Jaden Greathouse one, there's been a lot of misinformation with that one. And then Jeremiah Love, the Braylon James one made me laugh, Brian. Like, literally, I called you and I was just like laughing, dude. I'm like, what are people talking about? Like, why are we doing this? I literally joked in the chat. I'm like, oh, Brennan Vernon's going to decommit? Like, it's just such a
and saying that out of absurdity, because Brennan Vernon's not going anywhere.
That's like him and Drake Bowen are like the two guys in the class that are like, if you told me that they're decommitting, I'd be like, you're lying to me. Like, that's not true. It's just not, right? So, I was saying it out of absurdity because, like, at what point are we going to stop making that clickbait about guys that are just completely committed?
And we had a comment, well, Peyton says this and Peyton says that. Well, first of all, a lot of that stuff is, we've explained to you, if you're on the message board, you know why he's doing that. The reality, some people just don't want to believe us, right? And I understand that. That's fine. But we'll find out on signing day about Peyton Bowen. But like a lot of this other stuff, guys, it's nonsense. And I'm going to have a lot to say about that when signing day comes. A lot to say about that. But, the Jeremiah Love thing was just so atrociously bad. It's just like, are you guys serious? It was even worse than the Braylon James one, because it's just, it's not.
See, Brian, it was like situationally, but like when the Braylon James thing came out, I was like, so the kid that didn't want to stay in Texas is now going to stay in Texas?
Right.
Like, what are we?
Right. And I think some people are just being dishonest, but I think that the reality is there's a lot of younger people covering the sport now that don't have the same respect for integrity. But also more so, Ryan, they're just being used, right? Like, we've had people ask us to put stuff out, and we'll do but we only do it if it's like we can confirm it from other people, because that's just, we don't work for the school, we don't work for the recruits, we don't work for them. We're going to give honest feedback, and I wish there were more people like that. And there are some. There are some.
There are definitely some. Yeah.
But there's just, and when we talk about other sites, we're talking about the national stuff. We're not talking about 247. We're not talking about Mike Singer. We're not talking about those guys. We're not. I'm not taking shots at them, because I'm just not. I'm not doing that. But when it comes to the national stuff and the people that cover other teams, that's what we're referring to. That's the stuff that we're like, this is just BS, just absolute BS. And then where the Notre Dame guys kind of fall victim to that is they work in the same network of those people, and then they'll say, hey, no, we've got this on good authority, and then they'll go put stuff out, and it's like, they now look bad because they were told by someone else that this is what we're hearing, and when in reality it was they didn't tell them, well, this is just what the coaches told us. We didn't hear, what I mean, or and knowing that the coaches are just making crap up. So anyway, that's my rant on that for today. So. Anyway, my thing on Peyton Bowen is, if Peyton Bowen didn't want to come to Notre Dame, why are we sitting here on November 9th and he's still committed to Notre Dame? Why didn't he just leave when Keon left? right? I mean,
when
he's
you were,
he's a bigger NIL target if he's a free agent
yep.
than if he's committed
And
to Notre Dame.
and wouldn't it have been a lot easier to leave if you lost to Marshall or if you lost to Stanford or some of those situations, right? Like it could have been a lot easier to leave, but it's just, the longer it strings out, the more I'm just like, I think this proves that he's solid, right? Like, why would he leave right now otherwise?
Right.
So
And if he's going to visit during the season, he picked the right game to come to.
sure
There's no doubt.
did. Sure did.
We did have a super chat from Nick P. Says, popping in to spread some love on my birthday. So Nick comes in on his birthday and gives us money. That is great, Nick. Thank you very, very much. And happy birthday, man. How, curious how old you are, but I see your beard there. You don't have as much white and gray in yours as I do mine. So it looks like you're a young buck, but happy birthday, man. And thank you for spending part of your birthday with us. We really, really appreciate that. It's my niece Layla's birthday today as well, Ryan. So Nick shares a birthday with my niece Layla. I think she's about to be a teenager. She's getting close to being a teenager. I hope she's not already. That's going to make me want to cry.
Happy birthday, Nick and Layla.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. So next one from Archer. Against Navy, do you even need corners? Just play a bunch of linebackers and safeties, load the box, and make them throw. He's being sarcastic here. But look, I actually think corners are a very important piece to this, right? In all seriousness, like Archer's just messing around. If you can put your corners on an island and have them just shut down the pass game, but then also if they can be good against, like, the perimeter run game is going to be just as important from the corners this week as it was last week.
Yep.
But you've got to still be able to cover the wheels. You got to still be able to cover the posts. You still got to be able to cover the deep ends, the drags, the digs and stuff like that they're going to run. So it's actually a very important position in my opinion.
Well, and I think that last week, Brian, I mean, it was awesome to see guys like Benjamin Morrison and Cam Hart do a lot better getting off those blocks on the perimeter. Like that had been a inconsistent area during a part of the season, right? And then you saw it last game. I thought they were a lot better getting off blocks and making plays in the run game, which was great to see, especially going into this week that you're progressing in that area effectively. I mean, late to pitch, right? All the time. And that is going to be a big part of the game because that's where some of the explosives come in the running game. The explosives are not going to as much come from the fullback dive or from the quarterback. It's going to come from that pitch play. Like that's where the explosive plays happen.
Next question. Brandon Plesner says, what about Dakota Fields, Brian from California? Notre Dame likes him, but it's just he's not a guy that right now they're really in the mix for. He's very good, very long kid, very talented kid, but they're just not a major player for him at this point in time.
Yeah.
It ain't rocket science. That's not me. For those listening on the podcast, that's not me saying that to Brandon. That's literally the name of the next person asking the question. Says Brian and Ryan, if the cowardly neutered NCAA Division I Oversight Committee were to amend the NIL literature and make NIL as a recruiting enticement legal as a formality, could this staff engage? And then he goes on to follow up that NIL question I meant from Notre Dame side of the situation. Would it remain an ethical decision to not offer recruits any form of NIL package pre-enrollment? I would imagine that Notre Dame would do very similar things to what they're doing now. Look, guys, Notre Dame is not going to form collectives that offer these kids $1 million contracts. They're not going to do it. And if you're waiting on them to do it, then you're just going to prepare yourself to be pissed off all the time because they're just not going to do that. Mm-hmm. And I'm okay with that because here's the deal. Did you hear Sean Davis talking about? Did you hear the one Alabama defensive lineman who's talking about how this team's not the same anymore because of NIL? Everybody's kind of out for their own thing. When you got to buy a player, you are now in a situation where you got to play him or you're going to lose them.
Mm-hmm.
That's the reality of it. And guys are going to now much more than in the past be more worried about themselves. Like, well, I'm not playing with that injury because I'm valuable. I'm worth this amount of money. I'm this, the other thing. When you got and the point is, it doesn't mean that guys on your team, like Michael Mayer is making a ton of money right now for Notre Dame. But Michael Mayer is getting that money as a byproduct of what he's doing at Notre Dame and being at Notre Dame. It's not that you had to basically buy him to come, right? And that's the reality of it. Now, they're going to continue to show the opportunities for these kids to make a lot of money, like 6-7 figures. Notre Dame players can make 6 or 7 figures in NIL money in their careers. There's no question about it. We've seen some kind of get close to it as far as on an annual basis. Or I mean, a per season basis over time if you project it out. But like if Michael Mayer if a 3-year player and NIL was a thing his entire career, he'd have made a ton of money before he left, right? But they're not going to, Ryan, go out there and just offer kids, hey, here's a 4-year $2 million deal. They're just not going to do that. And honestly, I'm okay with that again, Ryan, because the kids that need that to come to play for you aren't coming to play for you for the right reasons. They're not. And they're they're not. And there's plenty of kids out there. Look, y'all, baseball kids turn down money all the time.
Yeah.
All the time to go to college and play for free, knowing that it's going to improve my draft stock, but I'm willing to bet on myself. Not every kid is on the take, y'all. This has always been true. And kids understand now that I'm going to get my money, but I understand the value that this other place brings to me. And I understand the value of going to a place where I'm going to be happy and fit and be developed and all those other kind of things, where it's not just about who's giving me the most money. That's just the reality of it. And people have to understand that and accept that and realize that there's going to be some kids they're just not going to get because the kid wants a guaranteed contract. Samuel Mpemba wants money. Okay, fine. Then let him go somewhere he's going to get the money, and good luck to him. Right. And go recruit some kid who maybe isn't that way. And they're going to be fine. There's plenty of good players, great players that are not only interested in that. They're not.
Brian, it's a real shame. There are some functions of the On3 site that I do like where the section where you can look at every recruiting ranking from all the different platforms. And there's a lot of the really
visit
cool
stuff is really good. You can look and see when they've gone to visits and stuff. Yes.
There's a lot of good stuff that they do to track, just information on recruits. But the option that they now have where they show the NIL, they're basically putting, a price tag on players and saying what each person's worth. I'm just like, this is terrible, man. What are we doing? We're turning players into objects for one. We're putting a worth on someone's name, and that's for a player to explore if they want to explore it that way. But I think that's just, again, feeding into what the bottom line for some people are. And I think it's ruining I do think that part's ruining the integrity, man. I have no issue with players making money. I really don't make money off your name, image, and likeness.
Yeah.
But it is,
but they're not. That's the problem.
Yes,
they're not.
Yes,
you get some $8 million contract. You're not getting money because of your name. You have not proven yourself to be worth $8 million to an advertiser or a company or whatever else. There's some basketball recruits that could be that way, but football recruits by and large are not that way. Yep. You're getting that simply as an enticement to come play school there. That's not what this was supposed to be about.
That's not NIL. Yep, you're right. Yep.
Because the other thing is the kids that are getting that kind of money for basketball, they're actually getting shoe contracts, which would be good no matter where they go to school.
Yeah.
Right.
Which is branding. It's not just exactly. Yep.
And it's more of an individual sport. I mean, it's a team sport, but it's an individual sport. You trade Carmelo Anthony for any other small forward in the country that year, and Syracuse doesn't win a national championship. I mean, it's just the reality of it. So, all right, next question. KL says, do we see Foskey break the sack record this weekend? What's he one off? Is he one away or?
Is he 1.5? I thought he may have been 1.5.
Yeah,
well, 1.5 to break it, I think.
Let me go look here real quick and see because I know that Justin Tuck has the record. Let me just pull up the number here real quick.
I think he's 1 to tie, 1.5 to break. I could be wrong though.
So let me go here. Media supplement. Let's pull this up. Let's see Justin Tuck. And Justin Tuck has 24.5 career sacks. Isaiah Foskey, because they actually the Syracuse game, they credited him later with a sack that they didn't credit him with initially. So he is currently at 24.5. So Ryan, that 1.5 you were looking at was before they added the number to him after the Syracuse game is where that was. Gotcha. And so he is currently, according to Sports Reference, he is currently at 24.5. So he is. Oh, I'm sorry. No. You're right. I was looking at tackles for loss. No, you're right, Ryan. He's at 22.5 right now. Sacks. I was looking at tackles for loss. That's my bad. So he has got 8.5 on the season. He had 11.5 last year. So that's 19.5. Then he had 4.5. So actually, that's Sports Reference is incorrect. Actually, hold on a second. So he had 4.5 in 2020. He had 11 last year. Correct. And he's at 8.5 this year. So it says here he's at 24. 24. So,
so he needs one full sack to break it then. Yeah.
Yep. So I'm actually curious.
Or 2 halves, I guess. Yeah. 2 halves, I guess.
Yeah. I'm going to have to look this up because I know there's been some discrepancy about what actually his numbers are. So I'm gonna look that up, but he's getting very close. Now, could he get it this game? Sure, absolutely. If the Notre Dame offense jumps all over Navy, they're gonna have to pass. And remember, it was a couple years ago, like Julian Aguara had a couple big sacks against them. 2018. Remember, he had a really big sack early in the game against them back in 2018 against Navy in that game that was in San Diego, which is a really cool game. So Notre Dame's official stats say that Isaiah Foskey has sacked the quarterback 5.5 times in the last 3 games, pushing his career total to 24. He's just a half a sack behind Justin Tuck. So that is where he is at. So there you go. Now it's official. He's a half a sack tie. Could I see it this weekend? Yeah, I could. Yeah, I could.
Only needs one.
Yeah. The Troll Hunter asks, he says, Brian, are we doing turkey donations part 2 this year? We will not be doing that this year. I just could not. I had too much on my plate, y'all, and I couldn't get there. I do want to start doing more stuff like that next year. I loved doing that, but it has to be done the right way, and I was just not in a position where there's a lot more work involved in it than I realized to do it the right way. And so we will eventually do that. I would like to do something where we do 3 or 4 things like that a year. I've been having some conversation. I'd like to do something like in October for breast cancer awareness. We all have moms, wives that we love. We have ladies that are a part of our community. I've wanted to do things kind of in the spring to kind of, just do different fundraisers. I'd love to do something at Thanksgiving and Christmas. So it's definitely a part of what we want to do. It's not a one-time thing. It's just, there's just a lot more to it last year than I realized. And we're just not in a position right now where I could handle all that, to be honest with you. So I hope you all understand, but I promise you we will get back to that at some point in time in 2023. Joel Easton asks, Mailbag, Nana has been great at setting the edge this season. Does he get a boost in snaps this week? This is a Nana week for me, Ryan. I mean, this is a Riley Mills inside and Nana outside week. Big one for me. Big one for me.
For sure. And he's been playing good football, so I'm all for rewarding him with playing good football, for sure.
Next question from John Climack, another one of our OGs, Ryan. What do you see Golden doing differently the last couple games, if anything? It appears like the D is causing more controlled chaos lately.
I think they've been a whole lot more aggressive on the second level, like talking about the linebacker play. I think they're triggering them a lot more, just kind of post-snap than they were. Like it used to be a lot more read and react. Right now, I think there's a lot more like just autofills in the run game. I think that he's kind of letting guys be guys to a degree, right? Like I think that up front, it's just like, Foskey be a dude and a couple other guys be dudes. But I think that he's mixing up coverages a little bit more. And I think second level, he's really triggering a lot more guys and creating a lot more chaos on the second level, John. Like that's kind of what I see.
Okay. I agree. I think Ryan nailed it. Brent Smith, how is Notre Dame's red zone defense going to improve by the time they play USC? Here's how you improve it. Don't let them get in the red zone. I mean, I've got no answers, Ryan. I don't. I was excited they finally made a red zone stop. No,
I was going to say, it's not 100% anymore.
Every single opponent trip into the end zone has still resulted in a touchdown.
Ugh.
It's just one of them was a touchdown for Notre Dame.
That's crazy. That's crazy to think about. I was happy though that we didn't have 100% on that label anymore. Though.
Well, it's 100% in touchdown, but it's just not always the opponent now getting touchdowns.
That's true.
So there you go. Honestly, Brent,
they are all or nothing, man.
But
all or nothing
in all seriousness, defensive line's got to buckle down and get more pressures and penetrations and force more negatives. They're not getting enough negatives in the red zone, and then the coverage has got to be better. I mean, that's the thing is that they've got to do a better job in coverage, in my opinion. So it's executing. I'd say being maybe a little bit more aggressive. I'd maybe take a little bit more risks in the red zone. I don't think they take enough risks in the end zone. And I wonder if that's partly Al Golden's NFL thing, because like you start blitzing the NFL quarterbacks in the red zone, you're going to get ripped. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like it's a different approach. And I would say in college, I'd say, heat them up a little bit more, force them to be more accurate in those situations where they have less field to work with.
Yep.
Ian Johnson says, when was the last time we had an offensive, defensive, and special team score in the same game? Do you see that happening again this season? I have not gone through all the games, but Sean Davis and I were talking about this the other night. And the last time I remember, now there might have been a time before that, but Tennessee in 2005 is the last time I remember that. So that was a game where you had Tom's, I believe it was Tennessee 05. It was either Tennessee. We were having this conversation. Yes, it was Tennessee 05 because Tommy Zibikowski had a punt return for a touchdown and he picked off Eric Ainge and ran it back for a touchdown. So I'd have to go through the list and kind of go through the different years to just really go through it. But like, just that was kind of off my head. Sean and I were talking and Sean was like, it was the Weiss era. And I thought it was either Carolina 2006, or it was Tennessee 05. And then we did the research and we looked it up and that was the deal. So I don't know if it happened before then. Certainly could have. I don't know. I'd have to go look at it. But yeah, we'll have to see. We'll look that up at some point in time. Will it happen again? I mean, considering it rarely happens, I doubt that it'll happen again. But would I put it past this team to do it again? Nope, I wouldn't. Rob Didoff says, Brian and Ryan, do you feel when a team's first game of the season is the triple option, it hurts the development for the defense during training camp for when they start playing current offense? Rob, I am so happy that you said this because there are so many people that say, I want the triple option to be game one. And I'm a believer like you are that not that it hurts the development, but it could potentially hurt your development. I mean, 2012, it didn't really hurt them. I don't want to spend time in fall camp, like 2 weeks in fall camp preparing for the triple option. I would much rather say if you're going to play Navy, always schedule it with a bye. That's what I would say is give them a bye, give them an extra week to do that. Or maybe give them a bye afterwards. I would always have some kind of bye before or after Navy, but I don't want 2 weeks of fall camp being spent on the triple option. I don't. Because then you go away from those type of things that you're trying to still build. You're trying to still build your football team. You know what I mean? It's like, you're Ryan, you grow you're raising a daughter, right? There's certain things you don't do to your kid at certain ages because you can stunt their growth, right? You don't have your kid in their 3 years old powerlifting, right? You know what I'm saying? Like you stunt their growth. Same thing with a team. If you go away from the things that you're trying to make as your bread and butter, you can potentially run the risk of stunting your growth in other areas. Now, what I would say is if you could guarantee me that you're going to have Navy in the open and then 2 not good teams the next 2 weeks, then maybe I'd be okay with it. But I don't love it. I mean, remember 2012, they did not look good. They had a bye week and Purdue the next week, and they did not look good against Purdue at all in 2012. So, yeah, I am not a big fan of playing Navy in the opener at all. I mean, again, they beat Purdue 20-17, and they needed Tommy Rees to come off the bench to win that game.
Oh, I remember that game.
It was not pretty. It was not pretty. So, good observation, Rob. I'm right there with you. Brent Smith says, to improve Pine's passing game, why not feed the ball to Colsey and Merriweather on the perimeter? A simple one-step and throw in trips and trio. What say you? I mean, we saw a little bit that last week, but to Tyree. I wouldn't say just Tyree, Colsey, and Merriweather. I mean, I thought that stuff was really good last week to Tyree. I'd like to see some of that stuff to Braden Lindsey. But the principle, Ryan, of that stuff is sure that's there. That's when an RPO. That's one of the things you can do with RPOs that I think could be really effective.
Yeah. I also think that teams are really letting up a lot of like easy comebacks and sticks to those big guys too, right? And I mean, they have massive catch radius, so hey, Drew, hit a 3-step drop and then hit the easy comeback, man. Like that game against Syracuse, especially, Brian, like if you remember it, Deion Colsey could have ran comebacks all day, man, like all day. And it's easy stuff. Like it's not hard. It's not a difficult throw. So I agree to the thought process, Brent, is that you have to make some things easy for yourself right now in the passing game because there's a lot of stuff that just is not easy out there. So using those big bodies effectively in the boundary to the field, running some easy stuff like that, like that's what we need to look at.
I can't believe that we forgot about the Wisconsin game last year. Michael Campbell they had an offense and a defense and a special team scores against Wisconsin last year. I completely forgot about that.
Didn't they have 2 pick six? They had 2 pick sixes against that.
Yeah. Drew White and Jack Kaiser had pick sixes in that game.
Yeah.
Completely forgot about the Wisconsin game.
It's a good call.
Yeah, nice job, Michael Campbell. Good call on that one, buddy. Very well done. All right, next one we have from Cole Barker. Sorry. He says, has J.D. Bertrand improved his draft stock? Ryan, of course, this question is for you.
It's an interesting question, Cole. Look, it's funny. Going into the season, there was at least one preseason scouting service that the whole NFL uses that did have a draftable grade on J.D. Bertrand. They had a late-round grade on him. And I feel like, obviously, he didn't help himself early in the season, right? Like, getting knocked out of football games, not playing incredibly well. Like, there just wasn't a ton of film on him, and it wasn't great film early in the season. Has he improved? For sure. So has he helped himself? for sure. I mean, it wasn't great to begin the year. So I think he's helped himself. I mean, regardless, my biggest overlapping point, Brian, for this one is, has he helped himself? Yes. But the thing about JD is that it's not like he's going to have a meteoric rise off of what he's doing right now, right? Like there's still some limitations to his game as an NFL player. So has he helped himself? Sure. Is it going to be dramatic or drastic? I don't think so. Just because at the end of the day, he's a 6-foot linebacker with not the best length that's, going to test fine, but not like an explosive athlete, right? So I think there's some things that are going to hold him back, but he certainly helped himself the last few weeks. There's no doubt.
Agree. Let's see. This was a great comment from Detroit Hunter. Ryan's like, my powerlifting thing. Ryan's like, yeah. Sends text to wife to get her out of the gym, the garage gym.
Brian, it would be a great video. It would go viral if there was a video of just like Jules like doing some deadlifts or something like that, or some power cleans. Like that'd be fantastic, man.
Yep. All right, let's go next here to TG 1395. He says, if we went out, do you think we make a New Year's 6?
Yes,
they have a shot. The options are very limited this year, but I think they'll have a very good shot at that. Yes, no doubt.
Because I think the Big 12 and the Pac 12 are going to kind of eat each other alive a little bit, like you only need a couple chaotic things to get in a decent position for it. Right. So
I think there's like 2 open spots, I believe, is all that there is this year, but they'll have a shot. No doubt. Coach Koch, what does a game like Clemson do for players' draft stock?
I mean, I think it's massive, Coach. Like it's look, we talked about this all the time. We call it a money game for a reason, right? NFL scouts for like Isaiah Foskey, let's use him for instance, right? Or any player. They're going to look at the schedule that they played, and they're going to say, who are the 3 to 4 best teams that they played all season? And one of those is going to be Clemson, obviously, right? So you're going to watch that game, and if a player played well, it's going to help their stock tremendously because that is going to 100% be a game that people are going to watch. How a player played against, no shade thrown at UNLV for a second, but not a lot of NFL scouts are going to watch the Notre Dame UNLV game. So if you played really well in that football game, sorry, it's probably not going to matter a ton for you. But if you played well against Clemson, if you played well against USC, if you played well against even Syracuse, right, then those games, Ohio State, those games help you the most. So they're the money games for a reason.
Next question, and we're wrapping up here. Are there Kenny Minchie talks? Are the Kenny Minchie talks starting again? No. I think that ship has sailed at this point in time. Here's the last thing. We're going to end on this because I think this would be great. Nick P., the birthday guy. We're going to end on the birthday guy. Speaking of the Wisconsin game, how much money is it going to take to get Gus Johnson to call all Notre Dame games? Here's what I'm going to say to you right now. Whatever it takes. Whatever it takes. Like, I would so love to see, like, he could even make Jason Garrett part of an entertaining, because, like, he raises your energy level. Like, you have to match it to a degree. So if you're kind of a dry guy like Jason Garrett, you're going to have to bring a little bit more energy to the table if he's doing it with you. You know what I mean? And so I would love to see that. I would so enjoy watching listen to Gus Johnson do games. He's great. And you know what? Like, I don't love a lot of Joel Klatt's takes on like Fox Sports and things like that. He's okay. I mean, I don't dislike him. He's okay. He's great as a color guy, I think.
He is.
Like, that is an awesome team. Like, Gus Johnson and Joel Klatt, to me, is the best color play-by-play guys in college football. I don't think there's a better team. I don't even think it's close, in my opinion. Now, I understand some people just don't like Gus. He's too whatever. That's fine. But I love it.
Gus. I like Gus.
Yeah, I love it. I'd love to see that. And look, if you dream team, Gus and Brady Quinn, sure, that'd be great. I'd love to see that. But just as far as looking at just the teams that you have now, I'd love to see that. So no doubt about it. No doubt about it. So that is going to do it for our show today, everybody. Thank you all so much for joining us today. We are going to be back tonight. You have Sean Stiers and Vince will have their mailbags. You're going to want to be a part of that. Tomorrow, Ryan and I'll be back. We're going to go over keys to the game. Tomorrow night at 6 o'clock, it's going to be me and Jesse Stiers, and we're going to break down the triple option. And, of course, Friday, it's going to be prediction time. It's probably going to be Sean and Ryan because I'm going to be flying out of here, getting ready to head to Notre Dame's next game. So thanks, everybody, for joining us. Hit that like button. Hit that subscribe button. Hit the notification bell. Share this podcast. And, as always, sign up for the Irish Breakdown message boards at boards@irishbreakdown.com. Give us a 5-star review if you're listening via podcast. We greatly appreciate it. And come back and join us next time on the Irish Breakdown podcast.